Man, you're still red. That's nice. And I feel pretty good. And that's a boy. That's like a man or something. So.
We'll go next time. I'll try.
They have like you probably use it for all it is. Grab some museums in there, but they have like the royalty on
That team made me so and then well, no, like he couldn't. He said,
You know that you guys are okay.
but wait, so.
I'm trying not to say
How was that trip?
I want to go there.
So you can see you think you're like, oh, we do have it.
You like having her dinner or what?
Sure. Yeah.
They have those
I was proud enough to see you in the last.
I want you guys to stare at it all night.
Everybody was supposed to post like a discussion. It's like related to that material. Like, and for part of the grade, we have to comment on 2 other things.
So
I'm like, there's not even enough for me to
I was talking the other day, but I was like,
post before the course is over to talk down to like maybe some girls.
I like to
believe that.
I'm guessing my
I was just telling them.
Oh yeah, then you have to go on portfolio.
On the way back though, you were great.
Yeah.
I didn't karaoke the other night. Well, I didn't sing it, but
You can read it.
I was like, I was asleep all the time. I was on the couch, nothing where
Yeah, that was. That's the real world. I tried. So also, yeah.
Yeah, every time it was empty.
They were like quick on it.
Okay, how's everybody doing? Excited? Ready for 3 hours of law on a Wednesday night? Yeah? I can feel it. I can tell. All right. So, sorry for the slightly late start here. So I'm recording for section 1. So what's happening is because section 1, we have 2 sections of the class. So your section 2, Wednesday night class. The section 1 class didn't meet this week, obviously, because classes didn't start yet. And but I got to keep. We only have 14 weeks together, so I have to keep them on pace. So they're gonna hopefully watch a movie of our class. So smile. And then what I'm hoping doesn't happen is, I don't know if you've been watching this, but we apparently have this like Snowmageddon thing happening this weekend. And if it turns out, which my son already has his fingers crossed for, that there's snow days next week, if Monday is a snow day, right, then we wouldn't have class with them. I wouldn't have class with them Monday, and then the week after that, their class is on Monday of the holiday. So it's entirely possible that section 1, we won't even have physical class until week 4. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that does not happen. If it does, I'm going to have to think of something else. I have to become I'll have to become a YouTube star between now and then to make the equivalent classes for them. Okay, so let's see. A few things. First of all, welcome. And there's cookies, plenty of them. We have 3.5 hours to kill roughly 40 cookies or so. I think we can do it, huh? Up to the challenge?
Yeah.
We had a first few deliverables due today. I know there was the glitch on the syllabus quiz. I'll fix that. I'm not as worried about The syllabus quiz is not designed to be some extraordinary academic exercise. I just do it because I've given up doing this reading through the syllabus at the beginning of class. First of all, I think it's really boring, and so if I think it's boring, I'm sure you do. And so you're in an MBA class, so you can read it for yourself, but it just gives me some comfort that you're looking through the syllabus. Because one of the things I've learned with the undergrads, which is you're not undergrads anymore, but the undergrads often won't read unless unless they have some reason why they have to. At least not all of them. So please help yourself. We'll be taking a few breaks, so there'll be plenty of opportunity for cookies. Okay. Now, name tints. So, I have the fortune this time of knowing many of you already, either from 303 or some of you are going on my trip to Germany. So, but in any case, I'm not always all that great with names. So what I'm going to have you do is make yourself a little name tint. And I'm doing something new this year, which I stole but am attributing appropriately to Dr. Seidel from biology. And this was her idea. And her idea, what she does is she has the name tints with this little chart on the back. And the idea, which I really liked, is it gives an opportunity for us to have a little conversation after every class. So on the left side, you will, this is how you will check in. I don't have the sign-in sheets anymore. This is the sign-in sheet. And I ask on each day for you to just write some sort of a note. It can be a question, it can be a comment, it can be something you liked about class. You cannot write anything that you don't like about class, no complaints. I'm just joking. You can write a complaint if you want. And then it gives me a chance to answer you back. And what I've noticed already, I just tried this for the very first time today with the undergrad class. Some of the comments I got were questions that students didn't ask in class, but yet they asked it on here. So it was a good way for me to create this feedback loop, especially with classes where we only meet once a week. It's really important for us to have opportunities to interact with each other, other than just the 3.5 hours we spend once a week. Okay, so that's the idea behind it. With all due credit to Dr. Seidel in biology. So if you just take, and I have to give this instruction because some of the undergrads folded it this way, and it's designed to be folded this way. Okay, so fold it this way, so it looks like this, and then just write your name on it, and then that way I will be able to know who you are and call on you when I have questions for you. Okay, everybody got that so far? Any questions, any long burning questions about this class so far, now that we are on slide 2? Guessing that no, hearing none, we will move forward. Clicker thing. Okay, so here's how I broke up the class, and I learned this, and this is the third year that I'm teaching this class. The first year I was a visiting professor, and so I sort of I just took the materials that were there before and kind of did what they did before. And then I started looking at once I was hired as the full-time business law faculty member here, I started taking my classes and trying to make them a little bit my own. And one of the things I realized, and we'll get to this in a minute, but first of all, this is a really long time to spend together, 3.5 hours. And if we spend 3.5 hours reading cases and doing all the things that you would do normally in a business law class, we wouldn't make it through the first week. So I decided that I would break it up into equal parts. So and with regular break times, this way, we all have get up and stretch our legs or call home or do whatever. And so this way you have a predictable break period every night. So we'll go till 7:10. And we'll take a 5-minute break, then we'll go from 7:15 to 8:20, then we'll take another 5-minute break, and then we'll go the last segment. So, and this is going to follow the 3 segments of the class that it's been broken into. So generally, although there will be a few exceptions to this, we will do the segment A in the first hour, segment B in the second hour, segment C in the third hour. And we'll get to that in a little bit. The third hour, the segment C stuff, is going to be a lot more activity, hands-on practicing negotiating skills, okay, because that's what that segment will be. So I designed it so that this first hour is the law stuff, the second hour is the strategy work, the third hour is negotiation. So as we get through the night, it gets a little bit more hands-on. Hopefully by 9:30 we're not all falling asleep. Okay? And then we'll have plenty of sugar, and there's plenty of coffee to try to help with that as well. But we'll try to stick to this pretty consistently week to week. Okay, so what are we going to do tonight in that time that we have? First of all, we'll just do a little bit of a course introduction. And I am not, like I said, going to read the syllabus back to you. So a few things we'll talk about, but otherwise expect that you've read the syllabus on your own. And then we'll do a little bit of an introduction of each of the three segments. The law segment, the strategy segment, and the negotiation segment. And then we'll wrap it up for this week. And this will be effectively the same thing every week. The only exceptions, I think there's only one actually, where the Executive Leadership Series speaker is the same time as our class, thank you, the same time as our class. We will go to that one as a class for the first hour of class that week. And that will actually supplement, or we'll do that, the segment B, it'll cover segment B, and we'll do it first. So it'll be a little wonky because that night we'll go to the executive leadership, we'll come back, and then we'll do segment A and segment C. Okay, so I know that's a little, I'll explain it later, but just for now, remember there'll be one night where it'll be a little different. Otherwise, you can pretty much expect we'll be doing the A work the first hour, B work and C work. Everybody get that? Make sense? Okay. Okay, so with all of that, welcome to class. Like I said, I know most of you, actually many of you. I was really surprised or happy to see so many smiling, returning faces. Surprised that you are signing up for more torture, but apparently that's how it works here. And in fact, you can't avoid me. That's the thing, because this is a required class, and I'm the only one who teaches it. So I don't even have to try to convince you, oh, please take my class. You have to take it. So that's great for me. That works out really good for me. So just a little bit about me. I said this is my third year here. This is my in June, or I guess July. Yeah, June will be the 25th anniversary of my graduation from law school. So I've been practicing law now for quite a time. I spent the first chunk of that time as a corporate lawyer for large corporations in California, mostly in the subprime mortgage business, and I was a part of that whole debacle. I was involved in that business prior to it blowing up the U.S. economy, and I did spend 1-2 year stint at a company called Guess. They make clothing and jeans and stores and malls and so forth. I was corporate counsel there for 2 years. And then after that, I got my MBA, much like you all are doing, and decided I didn't want to be a lawyer anymore. I actually decided that long before, but it took me a while to get to that point. And I went and did something much more socially valuable and got my MBA. And then I went to work for a company, and I was the chief operating officer there, which was really kind of a ruse. It was only, really what I was there for was to help package and sell that company, which we did. So we took 2 years, we got it ready to sell, cleaned it up, fixed it up, got it ready to go, and we sold it. And we sold it just before everything crashed. So we just squeaked it out, and then I took that money and got the heck out of California, which I've been wanting to do for a long time as well, and moved up here, and that was 10 years ago. So, and then, the whole economy came crashing down thanks to my former industry. And I never really planned to be a solo practitioner, but here I was in a place where I knew nobody, and my job that I had disappeared because I was working and still doing capital markets deals, and all those deals dried up during that time. So I printed up a few business cards and figured I'll figure out something to do. I started teaching some classes, adjunct. Before I knew it, I had kind of this law practice that had become bigger than I expected it to be. And then this came along, and I said, good, I don't have to do the law stuff, or at least not as much. I still have a law practice, but just a few clients. This is my primary occupation. So that's a little bit about my background. Why is that relevant? Well, I just said this, told the same story to the undergrads, and I do have to apologize to those of you who I have had in 303. You will hear some repetitive stuff, and I'm sorry about that. But this is not a law school, and this is not a law class. So this is a business law class. The idea of this class is not to turn you into lawyers, right? That would be not a good thing. We have enough of them anymore. But what my point is here to explain to you that what I'm interested in is for you to see the law through the lens of a business person, through the lens of a manager, through the lens of an owner, through the lens of a employee, through the lens of an entrepreneur. You don't need to understand the law the same way that a law student does. Setting aside the fact that law school doesn't really teach you how to be a lawyer, but that's another thing I'll get into later. But what we're doing here is we're looking at this from a perspective of risk. Well, law to you as a business owner is a problem. It's a risk. And you need to know how to avoid that risk, or if you really can't avoid it, but minimize it, manage it, and work around it when you make investments on behalf of your business. Right? One of the problems that I've come across with students is, this is more of a problem with the undergrads, but they tend to see the world in these very stark terms. You have this opportunity, you have a choice, and there's a good choice and a bad choice, and you of course always make the good choice. And if it was like that, then the world, you wouldn't need many lawyers, first of all, and second of all, you wouldn't make any money. The way that you make money in this world is by taking risks, by sometimes having to make a choice between what I call the menu of bad choices. You don't always get the benefit of the obvious good choice, the obvious bad choice. Very often you have 3 really crappy choices, and you have to make the best crappy choice you can make. That is what being in business is like. And so what we're going to be doing here is looking at all of that crap, right? At all the different things that you might encounter, and try to provide you with some tools for making good risk-based business decisions. And even if you make the best risk-based business decisions in the world, you will lose the bet sometimes. And so then we talk about what's the consequences of that. What happens when you make that bet and it doesn't work out? What are the legal consequences of that? So you can include that in your calculations. All right, everybody get that? Make sense? Because I'll tell you, in the subprime mortgage meltdown, which I was a part of, the problem with that was it was a massive mispricing of risk. It was companies, yeah, they were making bad loans, but making bad loans isn't a crime, right? The problem that what happened was they allowed themselves to believe that they had engineered the risk out of the system, and then they made loans, charged a rate that didn't appropriately compensate them for the risk they were taking. And they did that en masse, and that blew up the economy. So let's try not to do that, okay? Let's try to make sure that there are no loots at the center of the next crisis like that. And so that's sort of like the underlying theme of what we're trying to do here. Okay, questions and open mic. So if you have questions, I want to hear them. Stop me, raise your hand, right? This is not me talking to you, hopefully. This is a discussion. But I'll put this slide up here at the beginning of class every week. If you have a question, a comment, anything you want to talk about, feel free, right? That's what this is here for. I think I've told this story before to some of you, but my favorite professor in law school was for my tax class. And I know you're going to say tax, really? That was your favorite class? And the answer is yes, because he was probably the best professor I had. But one of the things he would do is on Monday mornings, he would say, did anybody do anything fun? And we all thought that was kind of a weird question, and nobody at first answered it. And so we said, okay, well, then let's talk about tax. And so pretty soon, within the next few weeks, there were lots of people willing to talk about fun things they did over the weekend to avoid having to talk about tax. And he was perfectly happy to engage in that conversation. So I don't care what you want to talk about. My point is we as a group need to become very comfortable in discussing with each other. And if there's something you want to talk about that's even tangentially related to class, please feel free to raise it. Okay, the other thing that I've been doing, and this is relatively new, is I have been starting a career as a stand-up comedian. Because what happened was I go to this business networking meeting on Wednesday mornings in Gig Harbor where I live. And since I've taken this job and since I've sort of shut my law practice down to just a minimum, I don't know if you've ever been to one of these meetings. Has anybody ever been to a business networking meeting? Okay, yeah. So where you stand up and do your 30-second commercial, you're familiar with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the point of these groups is you get together with a bunch of business owners and you kind of cross-sell each other's services or whatever, and they have this period of time where you get to stand up and give your elevator speech about what your product or service is. Well, my problem is I don't have anything to sell to these people anymore because I'm here, right? And they're my friends, so I keep going, but I don't have anything to sell them. So my 30-second commercial is, hi, I'm professor of business law at the university, which is great, but not trying to recruit students. So I have to have something to say. And so I came up with the idea of just tell a joke, to tell a lawyer joke. And now when I get up, if I have something else to say, they're like, yeah, what's your joke? What's the joke? I want to hear the joke. So I started telling jokes in class, and not really that successfully, to be all that honest with you. I think it's funny because the jokes, I'll tell them on Wednesday morning at the business group meeting, and I get this huge roar of laughter, and I tell it in class, and it's like crickets. So I don't know if it's just that I'm telling the joke poorly, or if they're just bad jokes, or if they just don't resonate with students the same. So with that long introduction, I will tell a lawyer joke every week. And if you want to avoid that torture, the only way to avoid that is to come up with a lawyer joke of your own. And if you do that, I'll give you extra credit. So last semester, the best jokes I got all semester were student submitted jokes. And so, and which I then told to the business group on the Wednesday morning, and they thought they were great. So, okay, so I'll start with this one. And I'm really a bad joke teller, so here we go. So a group of terrorists burst into the conference room at the hotel where they're having the American Bar Association. Now, does anybody know what the American Bar Association is? Yeah, what is it?
It's a big group of lawyers.
Right. It's like the worst organization possible that you could think of. All a group of lawyers, right? That's all a hotel filled with lawyers. Who would go to that? I would. And then, so these terrorists burst into the American Bar Association meeting and they take 100 lawyers hostage. And so they come up with, they take, get the media there and they get ready to give their demands. And they say, if our demands are not met, we are going to take one lawyer an hour and we're going to release them. You get it? Get it? So like we're gonna actually release them and yeah. Not Chris, I told you. Come up with your own. You don't like it? Give me one that's better. We're gonna do this every week. Okay. All right. So with that great introduction, here we go. We'll talk a little bit about the class. Okay. So I already talked about the weekly schedule a little bit. For those of you who I have not gone through this before, I like to explain the theory behind the credit hours. Everybody know how this works? You're getting four credit hours, and we're here for 3.5 hours. Does anybody ever figure out why? How do you get 4 out of 3.5? It's called magic. It's called the Carnegie Hour. The Carnegie Hour is it's used in K-12 and higher ed, and it means it's a 50-minute hour. So 50 minutes is considered 1 credit hour. It allows for transition time and all of that. So, and this is used actually in other areas too, like in therapy, like an hour of therapy is 50 minutes usually, and it allows the 10 minutes for the paperwork and all that. So anyway, so we're meeting for 210 minutes a week. And so that's where you get your 4 credit hours, because 200 minutes, 4 50-minute hours plus 10 minutes of break time. Okay, so that's how you're getting your 4 hours. The rule is, if you go on the registrar's website, I'm not making this up. I got this off the registrar's website. You're supposed to be spending 2 hours outside of class for every credit hour. 2 hours for every credit hour. So this is not a math class, but how many hours per week using this model should you be spending per class? 8. Now, I see you all panic, and don't worry, I don't have 8 hours planned for you. But all in, by the time you do your project work, you're studying for tests and all of that kind of stuff, you can expect that it's probably won't be a full 8 hours for all of you. For some of you, it might, if you're slower reading and all of that kind of stuff, depending on what your individual circumstances are. But the reason I do this is to explain to you what a great guy I am, because I'm not going to give you 8 hours of work. Now, unless it takes you that long. My plan is for you to spend about an hour per segment per week. That's what I've designed it to be. So the reading material that I'm giving you should plan to spend each week about an hour on your segment A, about an hour on segment B, about an hour on segment C. That will vary. Sometimes it'll be more, sometimes it'll be less. And in the segment C, when we get to the second half, when we come back from spring break and we get into the simulation game, that thing goes wild and you could end up spending, chunks of time on that. So you just budget for it. But if you're thinking about budgeting your time, that's kind of what I have, that's kind of what I'm aiming for, is that you will spend that time. So that's about 3 hours a week that you should be planning to spend getting ready for when we meet together. Okay, and it's important because this class won't work if you don't come prepared. And we don't have, as you'll notice, we don't have a traditional textbook. So I'm not making you read some, boring law textbook. We've got the reference guide, which you will be using. And if you feel like you need more background in a certain topic, it's there for you as a resource. But for the most part, what we're going to be discussing is what is on the Sakai site. So there are Sakai materials for each segment for each week. And I'm expecting that you have read that and read the articles and viewed the videos or whatever else I've put in there before we come here to class, because we're going to be assuming that you have done that work. All right? Everybody good with that? So in exchange for not giving you as much as I could, I'm hoping that you will do what I've given to you. Right? Fair deal? You have a deal there? Okay. And like I said, it will vary. So this segment C, when we it'll be relatively light in the first half, but when you get into that game that we're going to play for the second half of segment C, it can be kind of a time suck. So just warning you on that. All right? Any questions on that? Everybody good? Okay. Office hours. Now, I know you guys, a lot of the times the MBA students, you're working and you're not on campus as much. So these are just the times that I'm in my office. But obviously, if you need to reach me and you are not available during these times, just let me know and we'll figure something out. For the most part, I will be here for that. I have my undergraduate class from 1:45 to 3:30. So I'll pretty much be in my office before I come down here. But I know some of you have the class right before this, right? Some of you have that class right before. So I know that time won't work for some of you, but if you need to meet with me, let me know. I'm happy to stay after class if that's the only time that works for you, although we try not to keep you here longer than we have to on these late nights. But let me know, and I'll make myself available, okay? And then that's by phone, if you need to talk by phone. I'm always on email. I think those of you who've had me before, I'm always on my email, so you can always ask questions that way. And then if you do stop by, I do have food. This is a dated picture. I have not gotten to Costco yet, but I do have. I've been trying to, listen to my customers, and not everybody wants all the sugary stuff. So I've started buying granola bars and other things. So we have like a mix, so it's not just candy, but there's plenty of candy if you want some. And it's there for you, for students, so if you're hungry, you want to come and grab some sugar and say hi, please do. My son and undergrads this morning, I make them come to my office now. It's an assignment, they have to come to my office, which my wife thinks is super lame. She thinks, she's like, so you really have to like bribe them to come talk to you? Is it that bad? Yeah, it's that bad. So I'm hoping that you will take advantage and stop by every once in a while and say hello, so I'm not lonely in my office. Okay, so because this is a once a week class, the way to think about it, the flow of the class, is that the next week begins at the end of class. So at 9:30 tonight, we switch over to week 2, and week 2 ends with next week's class. So when we're done here, we will wrap with what we're talking about in week 1, and then we will switch over and start the topic for week 2. That's for all the segments. This is important in the game when we play that in the second half of the semester, because the turns are, they end at the end of class. So you have that's one period of time in the game. All assignments are always due before the start of class. So whatever, I've gone away from this having different due dates. It just gets too confusing for everyone. Anything that's due in this class will always be due by 6 o'clock on that week before class starts. Okay, and I tried my best to make sure that Sakai is perfectly correct, but there's like a million little buttons in Sakai that you have to press to make it work right. So if you notice a due date that looks like it's off, like it's 6 a.m. or it's the day before the day, just let me know and I'll fix it. I think I've fixed it all, but if you run into that problem, just let me know. But the schedule for what is due is on Sakai. So if you haven't looked at it yet, it's here. Over here on the schedule. This is actually straight out of the syllabus, but what's nice about this is I can update this. Occasionally I have to make some changes to it. And so this will tell you each week what we're studying and what the topic is that week. Okay? Let's see. Here. From current slide. Okay. All right. Also with Sakai. So everything for this class should be on there. All the materials are on there. All of the tests are on there. All of the assignments are submitted up through it. It's all through Sakai, right? So I try to do as much on there as I can. I'm told that I am a quote-unquote heavy user of Sakai. So I know that other faculty don't use it as much, but in my class, everything's in there. And I do my very best to put grades in there as quickly as I can, usually no longer than a week after, so you can always see an up-to-date version of what your grade is. I use it for announcements, which I've already done. I will send out a weekly class newsletter with what's going on in class that week, the reminders of what's due, and I do those as announcements so that when you log into Sakai in the upper right, you can see the history of all the announcements, all the information about the class. Don't forget about the forums. Forums are a great tool. I have them, forums for various topics. If you have something you want to just discuss offline, last year, we had a great multi-week discussion about the Second Amendment that went on for weeks in the forums. And it was just something we would never have had time to do in class, but there were some students who had an interest in it and wanted to talk about it. So that was a great way to do that. So if there is a topic like that you would like some additional discussion to happen, then by all means, fire up a forum topic on it and let's take it offline. The weekly lessons, we'll look at those in a minute. Hopefully you've all seen them already, but they're organized as A, B, and C to align with each of the segments of the class. So for each week, you have to make sure that you have reviewed all of the material in A, B, and C for that week. Okay. There's something due every week in the class. So it's either an assignment, or if it's a week where there's a test, there won't be an assignment. So but there will be something due every week, all 14 weeks. But I've tried to make it so that there's not overlapping. So you don't have an assignment and a test in the same week. There'll be one or the other. And then the tests there's 4 of them. And I will tell you they're challenging. They're designed to be challenging. And I will get, I'm sure, more feedback on my evaluations about how hard they are. And that's okay, because the tests are designed to be the differentiator. The tests are what will tell me whether you're an A student, a B student, or a C student. The rest of the stuff, for the most part, you'll get your credit for doing the work, for the most part, unless it's really below standard. But the tests are where you're going to show how deep your knowledge is. And so, in fact, some of you in the 509, one of the students asked me, because this was 509, this is for the Germany trip. So we had Germany and Chile together in J-term. And so we had some test questions there, and one of the students asked me if I wrote the test because she was afraid that they'd be too hard. And I said, well, but not for 509. But for this class, they're hard. They're designed to be hard, and they're designed really to show me to really be valid tests. Like, not everybody's going to get an A on it, and you have to be ready for that. We will, however, practice them. So including tonight, we'll go through some sample tests. So they won't be foreign to you, but they will require that you have done more than just sort of passed through the materials. You'll have to have a deeper understanding of the materials if you plan to do well on them. Okay, anybody, any questions on that so far? Okay. Yes, sir.
I don't know if that's the right time, but
yeah.
I had a question about the test question form.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's okay to put on there? Because, I mean, I put a picture of the question,
Yeah.
I'm like, I think the answer should be this.
Yeah.
But should it be that? And then, you know, it's,
Yeah.
Is that okay?
That's exactly what it's designed for.
Okay.
Yeah. The idea being that if you have that question, others probably do too. So you can ask the question, I can answer it, and everybody can see that back and forth. And then if I give credit, I'll give credit to everybody for that question. So, but I don't always give credit. It's about 50% of the time, I would say, where someone raises a question and I'll grant credit about half. That's usually ends up being about half the time.
So it's only if we think there's something wrong with the question.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if you think it's something you want to talk about, then let's talk about it, right? I mean, sometimes the best learning is after the test, after you've had a chance to take it, and we can talk about it. So if there's something, and even if you got it wrong and you challenged the question and you still got it wrong, that's still a valuable experience, because now you understand why you got it wrong. And so does everybody else, because it's on the forum. The other thing it does is it acts as a database for me, so that next semester I know which questions if I have to make changes to them. Okay, so that's what it's used for. So you should not feel restricted at all as far as except if you are not comfortable doing it. If there's something that, I mean, and what I mean by that is sometimes there are test questions that someone might feel personally offended by. And if there's a reason why maybe they don't want to talk about that in front of everybody, I respect that, and then you feel free to email me. Yeah, Bill.
With that, wasn't it, I don't remember exactly, but didn't we post it like after the test was closed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and
and
in the tests that you'll take, you won't be able to see to see the responses to each one until after.
Oh, I get it.
Yeah. So, but what I don't want you to do is post a question about a test question before it has closed. Like, I don't know what the answer is. Can you tell me, is it answer A or is it answer B? Okay, well, that I don't want, right? So the challenges should be posted after the test has closed. And you won't be able to see your answers until, you'll be able to see your grade, but you won't be able to see which ones you got right and wrong until after the test is closed anyway. So,
Will we be able to look back at the questions after the test is closed?
yes, you will.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. There's a setting in Sakai that says, make the responses available on, and I make that at the same time as the test closes. So as soon as the test closes, you'll be able to go in and see which ones you got wrong and right, and it'll tell you what the right answers were. But prior to that, you'll know your score. You just won't know which ones you got right or wrong until after the test closes.
And so after it closes, that's when we post.
Right.
Okay, that's what.
Yeah. Okay. Now, if during the test you have a question of clarification, you can email me about that. I probably will say I can't answer that question, but you're welcome to ask. Okay, so I mentioned the 3-segment structure, and this is where I got the idea. In addition to the fact that it's 3.5 hours at night and needed something to break it up, when I looked at the course description, I realized it had 3 distinct segments to it. Okay, so the course description says, and this is right out of the catalog, out of the university catalog. It says this class is, number 1, a survey of legal topics essential to effective managerial decision making. It is an exploration of the legal, ethical, and social implications of legal strategies and practices. And it also examines the sources and development of conflict and develops negotiation as a tool for managing conflict situations. Those are 3 distinct elements to me, right? So I said segment A is this first sentence, and this is a little bit of an overlap of what we learned in 303, but it is not just 303 light. Okay, so 303 is the undergraduate business law class here that I teach. Some of you are alumni of that. But this topic is designed to make sure that you as MBA students have a survey understanding of the law. And that means we are gonna skim along the top, right? We're gonna go broad, but we are not necessarily gonna go deep. But that's why I picked the book that I did. Number 1, because it's really inexpensive. Number 2, it is a good resource guide that you can hopefully take with you and keep on your bookshelf after you leave this class. And third, it's a reference. So if there is an area that you would like some more depth that we don't have time to cover in depth, you have a resource guide for that. You will also be using it in that segment as well as later on in the game for a legal resource. So that it's kind of your abbreviated legal resource. Okay, so that's what we'll be doing there. That will be, the segment A will be, I think I mentioned this a little earlier, will be a little bit more lecture-ish, but still we'll have discussion components to it. But it'll be the most kind of more traditional classroom feel at first hour. The second hour is where we're going to be, and we'll go into a little bit more detail on each of these a little later when we introduce each one. But the second hour, we will talk about legal strategy. Because it's one thing to know what the Securities Act of 1933 is. Okay, that's reasonably useful to know. But as MBA students, you're going to need to know, how does that impact the strategy of my company? So yeah, I know what the 33 Act is, but when do I use it? Why would I use it? And what are the risks? And that's what we'll be talking about in segment B. We'll be looking at specific legal strategies, at specific structures of legal strategy evaluation, and we're really going to dive into the ethical aspects of it. Okay, so we sometimes think about, again, undergrads in particular tend to think about these things in very stark terms, but the reality is, let's say, for example, that you have a case, your facts are really bad, but you have a whole lot of money and your other side doesn't, right? And so you can win this case simply by bombarding them with paper. Now, but if you were on equal grounds, you lose, but you can win the case just simply by overwhelming them. And that is a strategy that is used all the time. That's very normal, very common practice. So that's what we'll be talking about in this segment. Okay. And that's something we don't spend a lot of time in the undergrad class because we're too busy dealing with all of this stuff. Okay, and then lastly is this last element seems kind of out of place a little bit. And when I first looked at this, I thought, well, that really should be a different class. And I guess at one point it was. At one time they did have a whole conflict resolution negotiation course. And at some point along the way, this is what I've heard, they sort of put it together with this class. And at first I thought it seemed kind of out of place, but I later came to realize it fits in really well. And it fits in really well because it ultimately serves as kind of a capstone of everything else we learn in this class. And what we'll do is we'll spend the first half of the semester prior to spring break learning about some of the theory behind conflict negotiation and negotiation. And we'll be doing some practice as well. It'll be more hands-on because it'll be that last hour of the night. Then when we come back from spring break, you're going to be on teams and you're going to be engaged in this multi-week crazy, chaotic game that I've created. And if you, I know many of you, I don't know if you've talked to some of the students from last year, they are intensely interested in what the game will be like this year. And I've used a lot of their feedback to help redesign it. And so the idea there is to create this sort of simulated game environment where you're going to have to put together some of the things we've been learning about in these other in the other segments. You'll have to know enough about the law and enough about strategy to then put that together and run this business and negotiate with the other teams and negotiate within your team. And it's a lot of fun. I think it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to watch you do it. And what's great about it for me, the best part is I get to be God in this game. I'm the government. So I get to make the rules. I get to mediate the disputes, and I get to set all the parameters. So it's sort of like, whoa. It's like I'm going to make a version of Lord of the Flies class, and so it's fun without the death. Of course, no death. Nobody gets hurt. Okay, so everybody familiar with Bloom's taxonomy? Anybody seen this before? Some of you seen it before? Nobody? Okay. All right, you've seen it before, Melissa? Yeah. What is it?
Basically, just like the way, like starting from like surface level knowledge all the way to when you're gonna remember it for the rest of your life.
Yeah, okay, yeah, right. It's one way to look at it. It is a educational theory, pedagogical theory that underlies a lot of what you do, not only in this class, but in a lot of classes. Very well respected, I mean, there's some criticisms of it, but effectively what this is telling you is there are levels of understanding of a topic. And so you start at the base of the pyramid with just remembering, just being able to recall basic facts. So if you can recall a basic fact or concept, you've satisfied this sort of basic level for that topic. That is not our objective, just so you know. We will start here, but this is not where we are ending. Some introductory courses, general ed courses, might be perfectly fine living on this level, right? That's all they're really designed to do. This is an MBA course. We are starting here. We're not stopping here. Okay. Then for any given topic, you'll notice the pyramid narrows because as you get higher, there's obviously less material you can cover. You can't get to this level of understanding for everything. So we start moving up the ladder, up the pyramid a little bit. We start narrowing our focus, but we start getting a deeper understanding of that topic. The understand level says you can explain the idea. So you're not just regurgitating it, but you can actually explain it to someone else, teach someone else that topic. Okay, that would be the second level. We're not stopping there either. Okay, then we're going to move up to, can you use this information? Are you able to take what you've learned and use it, apply it to a different situation, to a different set of facts? This is where your tests are in this class. The tests are at the applied level. So I'm expecting that for the learning objectives that I have given you on Sakai, for each one of those, in order to do well on the test, you'll need to have advanced to an apply level of understanding. Then we're going to do some experiential things. We're going to draw some connections among different ideas. This is the analyze level. This will be happening in class. This is what we'll be doing in class. We'll also get up to the evaluate level. You'll be needing to take a position and be able to use what you've learned to justify that position. This is kind of what I expect to be happening in the discussions. This is what you should be getting by reading the materials that I give you, maybe up through here. And then in class, we will cover here, and we will make our way up here. And then in the produce, are you going to produce something new? That's the game at the end. That's, can you take all of this stuff and can you actually produce something? Can you win the game? Okay, so that's the educational theory behind the class is built into this pyramid. And I always like to provide this to students because I don't think it should be hidden from you. This is the theory that most teachers use when they're building out a learning objective. The idea is you set a learning objective and then you target a level of understanding for that, and then you assess that level of understanding. The test is the assessment of that. So I am assessing you at this level, but we will be playing a little bit higher on this pyramid, okay? That makes sense? Any questions? Okay. Okay, class participation. This is also something new. I am not grading class participation anymore. I decided not to do that. I got frustrated after last semester. I realized that there's really no good way to do it fairly and equally, and it's really hard to administer, and it's just not worth the effort. That being said, this class will not work unless you are all actively engaged in it. So how do I solve that problem? Because you're not undergrads, so one way I solve it is to expect you to perform at a master's level, which means you need to be more proactive. But even with the undergrads, I've gone to this policy. And so I have my name tents, which you have to give back to me every week, and I'll give them back to you, so we make sure we always have them, and I'll be able to call on you by name because I won't have to rely on my terrible memory to remember your names. I will try to get, and in smaller classes like this, I will probably remember your names after a few weeks. But this is the deal with devices. I personally am a multi-screen person. I just right now, I've got this screen, I've got my phone, I usually have my laptop and my iPad, and you should see me on election night. It's like a control room in my basement. And it would be hypocritical for me to say you can't use these devices. Some faculty, we have debates about this when we meet as faculty. Some faculty think we should just turn them all off. They should all just be banned. They're terrible. They distract students from what they're supposed to be doing. I, on the other hand, think that I recognize this is the world we live in. When you get into your job, you're not going to be told to put your computer away. You're going to be sitting in front of a computer most likely most of the day. So I get that, and it's fine to have it as a learning tool. However, if it becomes a distraction, then I am sensitive to the argument that this can create a barrier to learning. So what I've decided is that if you're welcome to have your computers, all of you who have them, I think it's great. But if you have them, and if you have them open in front of you, and I ask a question, and nobody raises their hands, those of you who have computers open, it is as if your hand is in the air. Right? So if I ask a question, and I say, oh, Raquel, thank you for raising your hand. Okay? Melissa, thank you for raising your hand. Okay, so those of you on your devices can expect to be called on slightly more often than those who are not. Now, you are adults and you are in an MBA program. I'm hoping that this is not going to be a problem here. But this is my new system that I'm trying out this semester, and there's no grade for participation, but participation is mandatory. We good on that? Okay, we'll see how that goes. Any questions on the syllabus? or anything else we've talked about. Yes?
Can I use my cell phone as a dictionary to check some words because
Sure.
English is my third language?
Yeah. No, you can use your devices. Please feel free to use them. But
I don't want you to think I raised my hand.
yeah, well, that's the deal. Yeah. So just be prepared to answer the question. Yeah. So whatever you're Googling, if it's about class, then you'll be prepared, right? It works great. I haven't sold you yet. Yes, and TJ. Yes, TJ.
Okay. For the simulation game.
Yeah.
So they're gonna start and end in the week, or maybe like continuous.
It's multi-week.
Oh.
It starts, so when we get back from spring break, that class after spring break will be the kickoff, the introduction. We'll explain the whole game, explain how it works. You'll get organized, you'll form your corporation, it all gets going. From the next week and through the end, each week is a turn in the game, like a period, like a year of the game. So you have activities, you'll have certain objectives you'll have to achieve during those weeks if you want to win. And it is a friendly competition. There's no points for grade points for winning, but trust me, that won't get in the way from you being very cutthroat competitors. If last year was any indication, there was one team in particular they just admitted, because you have to do a presentation at the end where it's like your presentation to shareholders. So it's like, okay, you have to explain everything you did, you have to explain your outcome to the rest of the class. And they just said, yeah, we just had no scruples. We just, they tried to corner the market in one of the products. They lied, cheated, and stole their way to victory. They won the game. And, that's actually was a very good lesson, because in the real world, very oftentimes it's the cheaters who win. So you'll have to keep that in mind when you get there, right? So you can be perfectly ethical if you want, but you probably won't win the game. Okay, so with that, there'll be more. Yes, Sarah?
So for the tests,
Yes.
there's nothing during final week for us as long as we finish that online test before final week starts.
Correct, yes. Yeah, there's no specific final. Yeah, and all the tests are on Sakai, and they're open for a week. They open when they open, and you have a 1 week to take it, and it's time limited. So but you can pick that 2-hour window anytime during that week that you want. But there's no specific final during finals week.
And I have one more question.
Yeah.
For the lectures, for the extra credit, so we're required to attend one. Are we writing a reflection for that one, or are we only writing a reflection for the other 3?
You need to write a reflection for every one that you want to get credit for.
Okay.
You get a kind of a free bonus because we're going as a class to one of them. And if that's a problem for you because your schedule doesn't permit, let me know and we'll work something out. But I have a feeling that between my class and if you're in any other class, you'll probably go to at least one other of them, probably. Many of you will anyway. But if it becomes a problem, let me know and we'll work something out. Okay? Yeah? Yes, Kate?
So you do say that you're requiring ones during the first 3 weeks to visit you.
Yeah, don't worry about that.
Okay.
I took that out. Yeah, you're not required to do that. Yeah. Yeah, I should take that out of there. At one point I was going to make that a requirement for you guys, but I realized with the night class and all that, it doesn't work. So yeah, ignore that.
But we can still come get you.
Yes. In fact, I would love it if you would come and get candy, because then I won't eat it. Any other questions about the syllabus?
I have one question.
Yes.
Another question about the quiz.
Yeah.
So in the class preparation for the textbook readings, you said it's optional, but at least reference the material.
Yeah.
But then in the back, it says like you have to read it. And then on the question, I got it wrong.
Okay, well, I'll have to see the question again.
Okay.
So, but what I'm getting at there, and by the way, it's the syllabus quiz. So just let me know, I'll give you, I don't really care that much about it. It's more the exercise of making sure you read the syllabus. Maybe it's not as clear as it should be. The book itself, you don't necessarily have to read every word of the chapters that are assigned for that week, but the material on Sakai you do. So, you know, I expect that you have read the material I've asked you to read. That is required. But the book itself, I'm not expecting you to read every word of every chapter of it. That's just not the kind of book it is. That's not its purpose in this class. It's not a textbook, it's a reference book. All right, so send me an email or post something, we'll take care of that if it's unclear. Any other questions on the syllabus? Okay, all right then. Last thing is, so we've talked a lot about what I expect of you. This is what you should expect of me. And my hope is that by the end of this class, that you will say that it was interesting. This is the toughest nut for me to cover because we're studying the law and it's just can only be so interesting. But I will do my best to make it as interesting as I can. Relevant that's easy because I can guarantee you that what we talk about in this class will be relevant to your business career, one way or the other. The material is just, this is a class about how the world works, and it is just going to be relevant to you. Challenging, my goal with this is to make it challenging. Like, I don't want it to be too easy because then I really haven't done my job as a member of the faculty here, but I also don't want it to be too hard because that's no fun for anybody. So I'm trying to balance that, and I will tell you that that's an ongoing project and probably will be for as long as I do this job. Sometimes also, one of these things that's really interesting, sometimes, I remember this when I was in my MBA program, there was a test question in the finance class that everybody bombed. And we were 75 people in the class, and everybody bombed it. And our finance faculty, after the test, he's like, it was the easiest question on the test. It's like, I totally missed, you know, to me, this just seemed super, super easy, but we all missed it. So there was a disconnect there. That happens. So sometimes things that I think are hard end up being easy, and sometimes things that I think are easy end up being more difficult. But I am trying to balance that. If you do think that I'm falling short on any of these, you know, make sure to let me know. You should also expect that I do my best to be as fair as I can to everybody. If, for example, there is a test question that you think is wrong, let me know. If you're right, I'll give you credit for it. That's just one example. I try to treat everyone equally. So sometimes you might hear me say, you might come to me with a very good and very fair and reasonable request for something, but I might say no because and my answer might be, well, if I do it for you, I have to do it for everybody else. So it's not that I don't want to help you or give exceptions or whatever, but if I do that, then I'm not really being fair to everybody. So I do have a pretty strict tolerance, zero tolerance on late work. You know, turn it in or zero. So make sure you've turned everything in on time, and if you do that, I think everything will be fine. And then last, I try my best to communicate and be as transparent as I can about the class. You will probably get more email from me than you want. I'm sorry, you can just delete them if you don't like them, but I will at the very least send you one email a week in the form of the newsletter. But if something does pop up that I feel like you should know about, I will send you more messages, and that will just be something that is a part of being in this class. So, any questions on that? Okay, good. Okay, so we're going to work in teams on a lot of things, and we'll be working in teams leading up to the game, but these will be your teams also for the game. So last year, I didn't assign the teams until the game started. And in retrospect, I think that was a little bit of a mistake because you do need an opportunity to sort of get a feel for your teammates because you're going to be making these group decisions. And so I think I decided instead to have you form teams up front. In order for this all to work, there needs to be an even number of teams. So 4 teams was too few. The teams would have been too big. And so 6, we have to go with 6. So that means the teams are between 2 and 4 members each. So, but again, there can only be 6 teams. So you'll have to pair up. We'll just sort of see how this works. We'll go to break here, and when we come back from break, you guys can get together. I'll put out the things. You can grab a sheet, team 1 through 6, and if we end up with, we'll have to maybe rebalance if it doesn't work out. But we have to have 6 teams. That's just, it has to be that way. So what I have is for you, and this works good because we're right at the break time. These are the, each one of you, there's a sheet with your team, so team number and the lines. So I need this back so I know who's on what team. And so there's 6 of those. And then I also have the first exercise I want you to work on as a team, and you can do that into the break and after the break, is I would like you to create a team charter for yourself. This is the form that you'll use. And what I want you to do is, the purpose of this is to trigger a discussion among your team about some of these questions. You know, what are your group norms? How are you going to split up your work? How are you going to communicate with each other? What are your expectations? This is a big one. And here we're starting to model the real world. When you get together with a few friends to form a company, and you're going to share that one of you has the money and one of you has the time and one of you has the idea, that's almost always an appetite for disaster, because we don't talk about, people in that situation tend not to talk upfront about what their expectations are clear enough so that there's a disagreement later, they have a way to solve that problem. And as you hopefully can already tell, that's going to bleed into our conflict resolution and negotiation discussion, right? And then what are you going to do to hold each other accountable? What is your mechanism internally for your group to operate? You will need to have had this discussion in order to be successful in the game, because the game has in it intentional conflict within the teams. So you will have different individual priorities that will not reconcile with each other. So how are you going to solve that problem? So you need to be thinking about, and that's a skill. It's a difficult thing to learn to do, and that we're going to be talking about in segment C. You're going to be practicing that as part of the game. Okay? All right. So here are the 6 team sheets, along with 6 team charter forms. It is break time. Take your break, and when you come back, use like the first 10 minutes after break or so to get your team organized. Perfect. Sure.
Alright, done.
Excited.
6 minority though.
6 weeks from Friday.
It's gonna go by fast.
I know. I still haven't heard from the State Department.
Really?
Yeah, I'm worried about it because I really wanted to do that. They told me they would, and then they went dark when they shut down. So my emails are probably in some inbox somewhere, you know, with thousands of other emails that came in during the shutdown. So.
Do you know exactly like what side of the plane we're like flying on?
It's a 747. It's a Boeing 747-8.
I was trying to like look at the seat.
Oh yeah, did you see that they sent the seat
So
assignments
that's
out?
why I was trying to look at the seat map.
Yeah, did you go on Seat Guru?
Well, I just looked up like one of the flights that's going right now, just really in the air, and they were on an Airbus for that one.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, because I was told it was a 747. They might have swapped you. But you know, if you go on Seat Guru, they usually, yeah, but if they did it.
So I thought they were in Airbus company.
Alright.
No, well, they I mean, they're German.
Okay, you're gonna
Germany
go
was part
somewhere.
of the original consortium.
No, we're having talent.
They're the only
It's okay.
airline that flies the newest 747 as a passenger plane. So, and that Friday flight, I've had friends, like our exchange student went home on that exact same flight.
Yeah.
It was,
So,
yeah, it's a 747 that goes back and forth, but it's possible that since then, they may have, changed equipment on.
Sarah's in some serious competition though. You're like the most thorough person I've
I'm
ever
very
met.
competitive and very thorough.
Yeah. I'm like, okay, well.
You're not going very
Yeah.
fast.
No, the pace will pick up.
Later, maybe people are like, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Say
exactly.
Sarah's
I need
lying.
to stay awake.
Someone say-
It's also, as the
Lying.
semester goes on, because especially like the undergrads, at first they're so timid. They don't want to take the candy. I always have the candy dish up front. And by the end of the semester, they're criticizing the candy that's available. I mean, I had last semester, it's like, how come there's no more Kit Kats? So I actually went and bought a big thing of Kit Kats, just because, hey, hey, I'm just going to show that I'm responsive to
Killing me
it.
right now, because I'm trying to get sugar, because I'm on like really high doses of prednisone.
I'm trying to cut sugar too, which is the crazy thing. It's like, I'm like this pusher of this drug that I don't consume. Like, don't get high on your own supplies.
That's right. Yeah, that is true.
I think it's one of the healthy people, so I keep trying to, like, I'll make cake thinking that I'll eat it, and then I'm like, I can't eat this. And then I like try to push it on them, and then they're like, no, it's not salad.
Well, it's funny. I don't know. I have this like weird, one of many weird psychological defects in my brain. And this one is that when I'm on a strict diet, which I'm trying to be on right now, I make tons of food that I can't consume. And for some reason, it helps me cope with not consuming the food itself.
Good.
So I make cupcakes and all this stuff, and but I don't eat any.
I want to grow my food.
But I don't do that when I'm off, when I'm not.
That candy for.
Yeah, I think I need to go back to the doctor's office.
That Sim today posted that revelation story instructors. So I
That's
That's on YouTube.
So that's already.
I'm looking for an all-star cast that's willing to do whatever it takes to win. Are you guys in?
Yeah, I want to win.
Okay.
I don't like winning
Then one of those.
at all.
So we're like.
It's getting this.
Social.
Oh,
If
okay.
it was some like low level, took that food back.
See, I knew that. That's why I picked you.
Last week, I led the
Read the text. It's a zero on my scale.
JPLM, somebody shared a political thing, and then usually the email was going down flying.
So they'll kind of in the score and the other guys too. You didn't reach out to me.
I looked right at you. I looked right at you. And I was like,
I also saw Chris look right at me and said, hey, yeah, my team. He was faster.
No.
That's why I texted you before we started. I want to.
Yeah. I had her husband.
So just because.
So do any of you guys need like another person?
Someone
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, you go over here, right? You guys can take second, it's okay.
Oh, no.
No, that's perfect. Yeah. I need a girl.
I went.
Ooh, yes, yeah, please. I have a feeling that this game can, we're gonna have to really do
I totally forgot.
Oh, you might.
That was so bad. I remember
What happened second?
It's not like.
all of it.
Oh,
It's so long.
You remember that I was there
So.
I didn't write like a book.
I was typing it, but, she got to like, it got to like 8:30 and she's like, what number do you want? And I was like, I'm like a third of the way through the test. She was like, if you could finish 8, I think you'll get an A. She's like, just finish like 2 more.
I wonder how she graded it. I wonder if she did.
No, she told me that, she was only going to do the top 8 for everybody. So she decided.
She should have stopped there.
When did she come?
Oh, like, no, not like.
They're hard.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, 8,
aeronautical school? So they have the big campus in Florida, but they haven't like.
No, that's never
Terrible test.
There's always that.
Well, so at first it was in person, and then slowly they started going to that online, pretty much you show up to
All that
class.
fly.
And the
Yeah,
professor
well,
was
what it does.
I was broadcasting that.
I don't, but no, but the way it works, so you adopt.
You had to watch
Wait,
that.
you are-
Yes, yeah, partial.
Dang it.
But yeah, well, I take five. I got
So
I got
let's say that there's one, it's a
Yeah.
We got four. I got TJ.
only one.
Yeah,
Select two.
Until you mentioned it just now.
Because
I blocked it out.
That was
So
terrible.
there's-
That was the only ones I didn't.
Only select one, you get 0.33.
No, I'm wondering, is it one?
I feel like she did put that text.
One right.
Yeah.
Is
You
it?
usually get
I opened it up and I was like,
You guys do the word, yeah, 8%, how about
I was like,
that? Cool, all right.
That's the main clause.
And then like, some of them I was like, how am I supposed to know this? Or like, it's so subjective, like how is there an actual answer?
Yeah.
Or,
I think
It's asking
remember the
my
Roomba thing?
Oh, yeah.
yeah, it's like, it's asking such a
Where the,
specific
like,
question.
little Mary has-
It's like, how do I roll in my nose to make it small? That wasn't the thing.
We're staying.
You made me, I had blocked that out of my memory. Why did you bring that up?
Oh, come on. Again, yeah, I know this is hard, but I want to know what kind of No, about a year and a half, yeah, it's like work. After this,
Okay, so I'm still looking, I still need a team 1 and a team 3. So, because I need, there has to be 6 teams.
oh, supply
So,
chain, yeah.
Supply chain, okay.
You guys already have
you
4.
guys all set?
I know. Huh?
What is Chris, what are you doing?
Can we move to the 5?
What's that?
Do it all.
Well, as long as we can end up with 6 teams. We have to have 6 teams, and it has to be at least 2 people per team, and there's only 17 of us.
Hey.
I'm only
18, I
team
find
three
it
in my
funny.
team.
Up to 1.
There's how many of us? There's 17 registered students, so if you divide 17 by 6,
Hey, you know, if we grow.
then that tells you on average, right, we need to have just under 3. Yeah. So if the one team is too large, there won't be enough people for the other teams.
Anybody want to join team 1?
And so these 2 teams I have that have 4, you may have to rebalance if you can. Yeah. This is the first negotiation that you'll be involved in.
Alright. You want to be on my team?
I'll let you.
Alright, alright.
No, I'm already.
Alright, Creighton's on my team.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. You guys are going
Yeah,
I love.
So team 3 needs at least one more person.
Let's do your pitch.
I was looking around the room, I would say I probably have more experience than you.
Oh.
Are we gonna crush everybody else though, if I do it for team?
I can't promise you to
Yeah, right, how ruthless are you gonna be?
You transit experience. Well, if the government allows such an unethical team to win last time, then I guess it's.
Well, it's just a model of the real world, there's unethical teams.
I mean, what if you are?
I am modeling the real government, so,
How many people are?
which means I'll be completely ineffective and hypocritical.
We're all here. Where?
It'll be totally. It's gonna be beautiful.
There's 17 people here.
No, she said she had.
Oh, there's 18, so maybe
Oh, there's, okay, we have an 18.
I bet we're gonna end up doing. It's not here. But even if we were to before, like.
He's not really.
Everybody's gonna pretty much end up.
So how are we doing, so you still,
I'm alone.
okay, okay, so team 1, team 2, How many do we have on, where's team 3?
I'm team.
But you're team 3. Who's team 4? How many do you have? 4. Team 5, how many do you have? 3. And then team 6 has 4.
Yeah.
So we have 3 teams with 4, and that's the problem, is that we're gonna need to do some balancing. So those of you, all the teams that have 4, come up here, and you guys are gonna have to negotiate and come up with a solution.
Okay, guys. I'll do it.
Yeah.
I was gonna go 18 divided by 6 is 3.
Yeah, if we have, but see, I only have 17 on my
Appreciate it.
So
We tried.
Caleb's on here.
Yeah, oh no.
What's
Well,
that?
I had it last minute.
Okay.
Yeah,
What's your last name?
Jordan.
See if you're on here. Okay, you are not on here.
The
So
thing is, I'm way
that would be
further
the
on my
18th.
team contract
Yeah.
than you guys.
So, okay. So
All the way
then,
I'm not
on.
gonna rewrite.
what's that?
I said, let's be great, let's win. Oh, no.
Oh.
You guys,
It's the
you
two
have
of
a
us.
partner?
Hey, if it's like that, then.
If you don't wanna be on.
A third person could join.
Yeah.
We could.
You could, you could be a winner.
Where do you want?
We can do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so, does that change any of the other?
Yeah.
It was. So Raquel, you're leaving team 6 and moving to team.
Yeah, and we're gonna win.
Okay.
All right, so we're against team 3. That's our first enemy. All right, got it.
No, we're all partners.
No, you won't be when this is over.
Raquel, your name?
You should have seen it last year. It was crazy. It was absolutely crazy.
We can get advice from like corporate, like union attorneys, right?
We'll talk about the rules as we get closer. But it's pretty
My
much.
girlfriend would be in the border. I just.
Yes.
How do you?
You know, right, at this point, it's still.
Honestly, some people like that. I don't think I would do homing. Speaking out of everything. Sometimes you can, we all have different.
Oh, so you're still due next week.
We all have different kind of.
Yeah.
And then I'm doing a, so that's a group, I'm doing a work fire. All French children. Still work studio practice.
And so, you know,
And then we're.
I don't necessarily want that person.
Yeah.
So it's more about what is your philosophy about how you're going to share it, right? And you're not going to this is documented just for you. It's more about making sure it's part of the conversation about how you're going to get it.
Yeah.
You gotta know.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay, okay. And this charter document is not an assignment. You do not have to turn it in, but you ignore it at your own peril.
I got a picture of it.
Email or text.
Yeah.
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 For communication.
Okay.
All right.
I work with you guys in the
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
Is your objective to, you know, I had.
Yeah. It's years ago. So.
You're to get, you see, he was perfectly happy with it. And he had a thing going on in his life at that time, and he just didn't really We just wanted to get this. So some people are very different versions of the statement for himself, who are kind of almost and again, it's super important to do in practice.
Oh, yeah, that's what I meant by the priority.
You don't even have to write it out if you don't feel like it's excited and you should have got this.
Jess and I are gonna have our own.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't seem to operate.
No.
They don't really, they pretty much only do like. Yeah. Like one of our biggest criticisms is why.
Yeah. So like they'll have like
Like, is there just one person who'll be turning in the work all the time, or?
There's not assignment except at the end. So, but yeah, where you have that.
Well, I work in this trying
I think we should, like, what we've done, or,
It's already starting. It is gonna get much worse. Yeah.
We've got us all in much worse. So one thing you should know probably is that
It's really
We're an hour into the course.
I know.
Yeah. So, really big they posted pictures, official photos, and congrats on our newest instructor. I want to say, was like, or at least in my head, I'm like, okay, what is it? I'm gonna get something. And there's a page called WTF for my sister, they were saying, and so they shared it, like, they were, they were like, where you graduate your soldiers by and one of the really wet not the one that's she's one of the ones that's congratulated. So we made actually that the first came back this time. I was saying, what happened?
Oh my gosh. Our team takes so long. Afterwards, like a follow-up stuff. Why does it not work anymore? Someone takes it.
All right. How's everyone doing? Okay, how's everybody doing? Everybody done so far? Yeah. That's fine. All right. Okay, all right. Okay. How did that go? How's everybody doing with their teams? What, you already won? Yeah, the competition gets intense for sure. Anything that you notice in this discussion that you want to share? How did it feel having this conversation about what you expect to do in this class? Anything? Any observations? Yeah.
I can see like, because there's two of us, it'd be like if this was like a partnership,
yeah,
it's kind of awkward because you're like, you know, you kind of hold each other accountable,
yeah,
but like you need to say that.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird just with the two. But,
yeah. You know, the single biggest mistake that partners potential partners make, this is also true really in any even contract negotiation. The single most difficult thing to do, and also the biggest mistake to avoid, is to avoid talking about the possible negative outcomes, right? Nobody wants, at this point when we're getting together, nobody wants to talk about how might we make each other miserable? How might we, how might I annoy you? How might I fail to meet your expectations? And what are we going to do if that happens? Okay, now that does not sound like something you want to talk about. But if you don't talk about it at this point, then if those things happen, you are not ready to deal with it. And when you're trying to deal with it after the fact, it's much, much, much more difficult to do. But time and time again in the corporate world, don't make this mistake when you're in the corporate world, is I would get an email from one of the business people saying, hey, we want to buy this service or buy this whatever, we want to sign this contract, can you review it? And so I would review it and I would say, all right, well, what happens if the product they sell you doesn't work? Well, we wouldn't be buying it if we thought it wasn't going to work, right? That's offensive even to raise that question. Well, okay, but what happens if it doesn't work, right? Then you haven't talked about it. And so now you have to try to figure out the consequences for that after it already doesn't work anymore, and then you have no leverage. Your leverage point to talk about it is before you buy it, And if a vendor who's trying to sell something to you is offended by your raising the question about what happens if they fail to perform, then that's not somebody that you really ought to be doing business with. And I have been seeing this happen with companies, really big companies with famous names that sell crap products and do not want to be held accountable for it at all. Okay, so this happens. And so this is something that, you know, there is a little bit of method to this madness here. This is a simulation, this is a classroom environment, but these are real things that you're gonna have to deal with when you're in the real world. All right? Okay, yes?
So was the discussion of the cheaters are winners, was that encouragement to use your means available to you? I'm
Well,
just asking before we get started.
No. What that was about, and we're going to get into this in a lot more detail later, but one of the things that you need to know about yourself and about people that you're in business with is what are your beliefs? Who are you as a person? What is your ethical perspective? Are you willing to make less money to do the right thing? Now, most people, if you ask them that question in a vacuum, they will say, well, absolutely. I'll make more money, be willing to make less money and do the right thing. But in the business world, it's not so easy to make that decision, right? Because shareholders are expecting a return. And they don't want to hear you say, well, you're making less money. You're making less money investing with us than with the other guy because we're good, we're nicer. We're nicer to our customers where we didn't paper over that other poor customer who tried to sue us and we just bombed them with paper to keep them from suing us, right? We did the right thing and we paid them because they were wrong. Well, now you've made less money and your shareholders are going to wonder why you're less profitable than the next company, and they'll disinvest from you and invest with them. The system is rigged that way. And I wish it wasn't, but my job here is not to teach you fantasy land. My job is to teach you what you need to know to operate in the environment that you will find yourself in. So, long-winded answer to your question, however, you need to know, is your partner the ruthless team that said, we're gonna win at all costs team from last year? Or is your partner someone who's gonna say, we're going to be more conservative, we're gonna take fewer risks, and we're gonna be okay with making less money, but having a more stable company, right? That's the decision you're gonna have to make, and you have to know where are you on that spectrum, and where's your partner on that spectrum. Because if you don't know that, it's going to cause problems. In fact, this class is designed to accentuate that problem so you have a chance to learn to deal with it. Okay, but that's the real world, and you will find that is how things work. Yeah, John.
But in this game, you said it's not really, if we do the game, whether we win or lose, we'll still get a grade.
That's right.
So we're not actually going to hurt anybody.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, but that you'll find that that won't matter. Yeah, it's amazing. The prize for winning the game was like a giant chocolate bar, and it was.
What type of chocolate?
The winning team got these. They were these really nice chocolate things that I found at the store. Really super high-end chocolate. And then the individual prize got it was like the gold, that new Hershey bar that came out that has like it's like this gold labels like gold, silver, and bronze. So yeah, it wasn't much, but I'll tell you, it was that didn't seem to matter in the intensity of the competition. So don't let that fool you. You will become very intensely competitive in this game. Okay, which is also what happens in the real world. You would, and I mean this, I'm not trying to oversell it too much, but sometimes these simulations actually do simulate pretty well. And one of the things that you find when you study, and we will study some of these people who commit fraud, these people who start frauds, they start off oftentimes being not thinking of themselves as fraudulent people, but they become consumed with this and they become irrational in their pursuit of something, and they become separated from who they really are as people. We study in the 303 class the case of Scott London. We study Scott London, Melissa, when you were in 303. Is actually someone I know. I worked with him. He was our auditor when I was at Guess, and he was the head of one of the big accounting firms in Los Angeles, and he got arrested for insider trading, for sharing insider trading tips to a friend. And they have a picture of him. If you Google Scott London Starbucks parking lot, there's a picture that the FBI took of him actually taking an envelope filled with cash from this guy who he thought was his friend. Yeah.
What is the penalty for that crime?
Jail. You go to jail.
For how?
Depends. He went to jail for a couple of years, and when I started teaching these classes and used that example, I emailed him, and I didn't think he'd remember who I was, and he remembered who I was, and we chatted for a while, and his son plays golf on the team at UW. And he's a super nice guy, and if you're interested, I'll send you a link. There's a interview that he does with his podcast called Planet Money, and it's super interesting because they ask him, why'd you do it? He just goes, he can't even explain it. And he knew it was wrong. And yeah, he did it. It's interesting to see sometimes how easy it is to step over that line. Yeah, Nori.
That kind of sounds like the McDonald's Monopoly guy. I don't know if you read about it.
Yeah.
But he started from the bottom or something, and then he explained how he started getting different jobs until he made it that he was the sole person who can control the winning tab for Monopoly and McDonald's.
Mm.
And he just started giving this to this kind of like mob or something for a certain amount. Like he wasn't even getting the winning prize. These people they just gave him like a $300,000 or something.
Yeah. He just got soaked with the power that he had.
And that's what he said. He was like, that he just felt like, oh my God, I have this. I have the power, so I can do it.
And it's interesting when you hear these people after the fact rationalize it. At the time, they crossed the line somewhere, and they don't even know where they crossed the line. And it's really interesting to see. Francisco, get your hand up. Yeah.
Wasn't there an ex-NFL player that got in trouble for that, for the insider trading?
Yeah, there's been several of them. Yeah. Yep. Insider trading is it's one of those things. No matter what, every so often you see someone gets caught for it. You think that by now everyone would know that it's illegal, but it still happens.
Creighton mentioned it, reminded me of it, but we watched the Farmore documentary.
The what?
The Farmore documentary. It was like rivaling Walmart.
Oh.
But he kept justifying the falsification of his accounting records basically so that because he thought the business would eventually catch up and they would be able to fix it, but they were like way under by the time that he got caught.
There's 2 documentaries just came out about the Fire Music Festival. One's on Netflix and one's on Hulu. I watched the Netflix one, and they're, same thing. They just kind of got they turned into music festival. They got out of, became more than they could handle, and they just kept sort of telling the story, hoping that it would fix itself. And they didn't start off saying, let's go defraud people from money. Most of these fraudsters don't do that. Most of them don't start with that. They start making a mistake and then covering up for that mistake and then covering up for it again and then rationalizing it and trying. And this happens to good people. It happens to people that you will do business with or that you are in partnerships with. And sometimes the person you're in partnership is not the person that you're going to be in partnership with. I tell clients this all the time. I just had this the other day. A client of mine who I formed a corporation for before, and now he and his partner want to form a new business, a new venture. And I said, well, we need to write this all down, and he needs his own lawyer, because I've represented you before. I go through all of this. And he goes, oh, don't worry. He was the best man at my wedding. And I said, honestly, that makes it worse. And because you trust him, and you should trust him. He was the best man at your wedding. But what happens if he dies? If he dies, guess who your partner is? It's his wife. And his wife may not be the same person or share the same parameters that you do. So you just can't make those assumptions. You have to have this conversation. What if it doesn't work out the way we expected? How are we going to resolve that problem? And if you do that now, it costs a fraction of the amount of time and expense to solve than it does if you try to do it afterwards. Because if you do it afterwards, you have to hire somebody like me, and so does the other partner, and you end up spending more than the company's worth fighting over who gets to control it. I've seen it happen 100 times. Okay, so this is all stuff that, all of this stuff we're doing in here is all stuff that has some core from real problems. Okay? Great discussion on that. Anything else you want to talk about before we move on? We will come back to this theme over and over again, by the way. Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's talk about segment A. So I kind of talked a little bit about this already. What do we mean by this term survey course? So what is that? What did you pick up from what you read on Sakai or from what that term means to you? What do we mean by survey? Yes.
You just kind of like going through it, like we don't need to go into depth just because obviously we're not becoming lawyers. So it's more
Right.
like learning things that it will actually keep us afloat and don't get informed.
Okay, that's one way to look at it. Yeah. Anyone else? Survey? Anyone else have a thought of what that means? Doesn't mean we're taking surveys every week, right? But it does mean that there's sort of a checklist of topics that you need to have some working knowledge of. And we're just going to expose you to those topics. You have the reference book if you want to learn more. We'll spend a little bit of time on some topics in here. The biggest problem that clients have is they don't know what they don't know. They often don't know what problems they're getting themselves into because they just don't even realize that it's a problem. I didn't realize I had to keep records of my transactions. Surprised then when the Department of, is there a Department of Revenue person? Is that person in here? Okay, you're the DOR person. How often, you're in the compliance department of the Department of Revenue, right? Yes, one of my favorite opponents. And I've been against you guys a number of times. Is that crazy guy from Tacoma still there, the manager, Evan Tripolitis? You know him?
Yes.
Is he still there? Yeah. Okay, then we won't talk about it. I make reference to him. Yeah.
Yeah.
Enough said, right? Yeah. No, I don't want to. Yeah, we'll refer to him as person number one later. No, so how often do you and your agent, so just so everybody knows, the quote-unquote compliance department of the Department of Revenue is the department that collects the taxes. They're the ones that audit you and you look for.
Audit division audits.
Yeah, that's true. Audit division audits, yeah, you collect. You're the collectors. So once the assessment once the warrant has been issued, or once the assessment you guys probably issue the warrants, right? Yeah. So they're the ones that go and try to get the money out of you after tax has been assessed, right? Okay. And how often does the person who gets assessed say, these weren't my sales. I didn't charge these amounts. They're just assuming that I charged this amount, right? That's what the audit department does.
It happens really often.
Right.
It's not always true.
Right. Right. Well, just to give you an example, the way the rule works with the Department of Revenue is if they audit you, they will look at your bank statements. And because our tax in Washington is a revenue tax, so that you're not taxed as a business on what your profits are, but what your sales are. And so if you, so what they do is they come in and they say, well, let me see your bank records and then let me see your invoices. And if your total invoices are less than the total deposits in your bank account, they assume that difference is unreported revenue unless you can prove otherwise. And the law says that you are required to keep records that can prove to the Department of Revenue what your revenue was and that your tax collections were appropriate. And they have the right to assume that if you don't keep records, that it's unreported revenue. And so then what they assess is tax, penalties, and interest. And if it's sales tax, it's 10% plus penalties and interest, and you're responsible for paying it. You can go try to collect it from your customers if you want, but your customers 4 years later aren't going to pay you the tax. So why am I saying this? Well, if you didn't know that was the rule, right, you probably wouldn't keep records like that. And most businesses, in my experience, keep ineffective or insufficient records for that point. But to the compliance department, that falls on deaf ears, right? Assessment was given, you had your chance to appeal, and now you have to pay. Okay, so that's the argument. That's why we do a survey of this stuff. You have to know that that problem is out there. We're not going to go into all the details of the Department of Revenue rules. We don't have time for that. You have to know, though, that that's a problem that you have to account for in your business and make sure somebody knowledgeable is dealing with that problem. Okay, so that's what a survey class is. Okay, so I had asked you in the forums to do topics of interest, and many of you did that. But I thought I would give this like word cloud thing a try. I've never done one of these before. So what I'd like to do is see if we can make a little word cloud of our topics of interest. So you can go to this poll everywhere. If you have your computer or your phone, you go to it's poll everywhere. So it's pollev.com, and it's / Ralph Flick 800. And let me just make sure that this is turned on. Okay, here we go. Introduce yourself. So if I go in here, for example, and say my name is Ralph, and I'm going to say I want to learn about taxes. I'm going to mess up our word cloud because, okay. So it'll start building this little word cloud where it's supposed to. So let's see, is everyone able to access that?
What are we putting for you?
Put in a legal topic of interest to you.
No, the username.
Oh, it should just come up if you go to this link, poll everywhere, and go to Ralph Flick 800. Is this not working?
You need to
Yours worked?
Yeah. Yeah, just said.
You just enter a name, and then it'll allow you to enter a response.
Just type our name.
Yep. Yes.
You can enter more than one response.
Mm-hmm.
Ralph Flick 800.
Yes. Is that working?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So let me just see. I'm going to log in. We should see the thing. I've never tried to use one of these before, so okay. This is the response page. Activities. Okay. I'm supposed to do okay, so here, why is it not doing word cloud? Okay, well, we're not getting the word cloud, but what we are seeing here is a list of topics, so maybe we'll just go with that, and then I'll figure out how I had this working, it worked on my computer on my desk. So notice a lot of interest in tax, significant interest in, there's nonprofits, okay, employment law, taxes, healthcare, agency, that's interesting, copyrights and trademarks. We're going to be covering all of this stuff. So a couple on real estate law, several on taxes, and lots of small business. So this, let me see if I wish I could figure out how to, it was working when I tested it. Let's see, does this work? Okay, well, all right, so it didn't work.
Do you want to stop receiving submissions?
Yeah, maybe, but it's supposed to build it as you go. Let me try that. Let me see what happens if I close it. Activity. Locked. Response is hidden. Okay. Well, all right, so that was a big failure. Will it let me even sort them? It'd be nice if it would sort them. Okay, but I guess I can still make my point, which is there's a lot of overlap on taxation, but also pretty much everything that we see on this list is something that we will cover. So broad, not deep, but we will cover as much of this as we can. I will do my best with this list and what I have in the forum to make adjustments and focus on topics of interest. If you have an area of interest that is not on this list or that you feel you'd like to cover, let me know. If you come across something, an article, a case you want to cover, let me know. We'll try to fit it in. All right, I will do my best. But what we are going to do is skim along the top of legal topics that is effectively the table of contents in the book, but also the list of topics that is in segment A. Okay? So that did not work the way I wanted it to, but we'll just go with it. I'll see if I can figure it out later. Okay, all right, so now what we're gonna do is I'll give you an example of what a test question will look like. And you will not have, unless you happen to know this material, you won't have the knowledge yet to answer the question. So what I'd like you to try to do, and you can work with your assigned team if you want, or just with your neighbor, try to find the answer. See if you can locate the answer to this question by looking at the question or what it's asking for, see if you can identify what the topic is, and look through the book to see if you can find the answers. So I know don't be freaked out about it because we haven't done this yet. We haven't gone through any of our materials yet. So this is just an example so you get a feel of the kind of information and the level of understanding that you're going to have, that you're going to need. Okay? Now, I had printed it, but then I incorrectly printed the one with the answer key. So that would be very valuable. So what I did was I just have it up on the screen, and I will make it bigger so you can see it. I'll make it bigger.
Bottom right.
Bottom right here. Yep, you got it. I don't use Windows. Wow! All right.
I'm not that good, man.
Can everybody read that?
Yeah.
There. I'm just gonna
A
try to.
little bit around you now.
Or-
Would it be possible to turn on one of these lights
Yeah.
right in front of the screen?
Yeah.
This makes it a little hard to see. That's a lot
Is
better.
that better?
Yeah.
Okay, so I will let you have fun with this. Give you about 10 minutes or so, 5 to 10 minutes. See, now notice, this is very common for the kinds of questions that you will find on the test. It is a fact pattern, and then it says select all that apply. Multiple choice, but either 1, 2, 3, or 4 of these answers could be correct. And the way that the scoring works in Sakai is, let's say, for example, that 2 of these answers are correct. And you select one correct one, you'll get half a point. If you select one correct one and one incorrect one, you'll get 0. Because the incorrect answers count as negative. But you only get you can't get a negative score on the question. So you can get a 0. If there's 3 correct answers and you select one of the 3, you'll get 0.33 for that one. See how that works? If you so you can't just go and select them all and just say, yeah, then I'll get them all. I know I'll get them all right. Okay, so there's a negative point associated with getting the wrong ones. Okay, see what you can do. Yes.
For the test itself, can you remember that it might take me maybe 10 minutes to read that, then maybe it takes Peggy 2 minutes?
Yeah, the only way I can give time extensions is through DSS. So they don't let us allow variations in time unless you have a specific letter from from DSS.
What if we all get?
Yeah, can you just do it for the whole class? How many questions is the test?
It depends, but you have 2 hours and you get about 5 minutes or so per question.
would make it 4 hours, 10 minutes per question.
But you said it's all multiple choice though, right?
It's, there's some true false in it. Yeah.
No, but they're not, no short answer?
No short answer.
Okay.
Yeah. It's all objectively measured stuff. Yeah.
Oh. Uh-oh.
And feel free to discuss. This is we're just learning, so don't worry about.
Yeah, that's okay. So let's-
Yeah.
I read this chapter and.
Oh, you read it already?
Well,
Yeah.
So.
They want to
Yeah.
So,
United States.
I feel like,
At the state level.
So this is-
yeah, taking their own, processing it, writing down things. Yeah. And this is material, by the way, for next week. This is from
You gotta look it up.
a question that would have been on the test, covering next week's material.
A lot of you started out in tradition. That's not written down.
It's like
individual.
Yes, a statutory civil law objects and and all subject to an franchisees and public
No, I think
So administrative law.
Oh, so that, but they
Oh, so the ministries.
Oh, so, okay.
Oh,
That.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right, so it's like the foundational principles that they. But the Homeland Security Act created.
Yes, so that it's. Yeah.
Everyone has a different set of questions. We have A, B, C, and D are in different orders.
Also,
Created by a case.
Right.
They kind of
Just one off.
Oh, like a governing body.
Because like the FDA.
Oh,
And remember how we learned
That might be right.
the SDA, the EPA, the environmental, like there are all these organizations that they come out of, but they're legally allowed to set their own regulations.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Operation.
those, the government has to, they treat those organizations as subject matter experts. So in the court, they have
Yeah.
to go by
Yeah.
those regulations. So.
Where the government. No. The Homeland Security has, they have power from the government to do those type of things. Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah.
How?
How are you guys doing? Need more time?
So, this is like a.
Yeah.
I know.
I think that C is matter because the First Amendment is constitutional law. It's constitutional law that break down. Describes it as states laws. And the conditions that they make their basis on. So first of all, we have to hire to guide the common law. That's fine.
I'm not sure about that.
What are the agencies?
Yeah, there's a bit of my dog. Yeah. My dog was, I don't know, was Jake dying the year I had you? Yeah. He was dying for a long time. He was decrepit for a while. And, finally,
The government.
we had to put him down, and then he went for like 6 months or so. And then my wife had another dog. You know, like I said, the dog loves me. You did? I thought you were a dog person.
I am, but I look.
Oh. Yeah.
That's.
I just had that today. Yeah, she came to talk to the business group I go to on Wednesday morning. No, it's called the Harvard for Business Group, and it's basically a group of Harvard business people get together every once in a while. Every Wednesday.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah. It's great. It's really fun. It's like more fun than like the like Rotary and those other things I go to. So, yeah. Okay, how's everyone doing? Everyone have a chance to give a shot to this? Okay. So let's go through this together. So the owners of a brewery now this actually comes from a case. This is the Bad Frog Brewery case, if you want to look it up. This actually happened. And Bad Frog Brewery had a beer label with a frog holding up the middle finger. And so the TTB said, and for those of you who don't know this, if you create any alcoholic beverages in the United States, the TTB has to pre-approve the label. They have the ability to pre-approve the label. It's true for wine, beer, and spirits. And they suggested, in this case, it's a slight variation. They suggested several names which are humorous but could be considered offensive. They don't want to spend the money to develop the branding, print the labels if they're later going to be forced to pull the brand product and rebrand it. So they're aware of the Supreme Court ruling that says that have declared a right of free speech to corporations. This is a theme that's been happening in the Supreme Court, which we'll talk about. It used to be the thought that corporations were, the First Amendment didn't protect corporate speech, commercial speech anyway. And the Supreme Court has been changing this. And so they also know that the TTB, which is created by the Homeland Security Act of 2002, has issued regulations restricting offensive labels on alcoholic beverages. Okay, so which of the following is correct? Now, one or all of these might be right. So we'll go through these and then I'll sort of explain the link between the learning objective for the week and sort of what you need to know about it in order to be successful on this question. So let's read the four together first. So the TTB limits on beer labels are an example of administrative law. The Supreme Court First Amendment ruling is an example of common law. The First Amendment is an example of constitutional law, and the Homeland Security Act of 2002 is an example of administrative law. So just taking a step back, what would you need to know in order to be successful on this question? Yeah.
And then what administrative law, common law, and constitutional law are?
Right. You have to know what those are, and you have to know them well enough now to apply this here, right? So, and these are the four sources of American law. This is one of the learning objectives for next week. So this is tied directly. This is an example of a question that assesses how high up on Bloom's taxonomy you are with respect to that one learning objective. Okay, so in order to be successful here, you would have to know what the four sources are, or where to find them in the book, and know them well enough to apply them here. Okay, so what is, just a preview for next week, what is administrative law? When we say what is as a source of law in the United States, is one of the places you find the rule book. What is that? What is administrative law?
Can you read the definition or do you want me to?
Well, why don't you tell me in your own words?
So basically, it's like government agencies,
right,
that create rules and regulations.
Correct. Right. That's right.
Specific sectors.
That's right. And where in the Constitution does it give the authority to the TTB to issue rules and regulations? Who gave them the power to do that? Congress, right?
Yeah, Congress.
It's nowhere in the Constitution, right? But what the Constitution does is gives that power to Congress. Congress delegates that power, creates an agency and delegates the power to the agency to make rules, and so the agency makes rules. So when we look for the four sources of law in the United States, it starts with the Constitution, because that's where Congress gets its power from. Then we have the legislative, executive, and judicial power, which comes from the Constitution. So a constitutional law. Then we have the laws that Congress creates, which is statutory law. And then we have court interpretations of that law. That's common law. And then we have administrative agency rules and regulations made under the power delegated from Congress. That's administrative law. So you have to know that. You would have to know that. Okay, in order, or know where to find it. Okay, so the TTB limits on beer labels are an example of administrative law. You could get this correct without even reading the prompt, right? And one thing that I highly encourage you all to do is read the suggested answers before you read the question. It is the single most powerful test-taking technique you can employ. Because you're going to read this, you don't even need to read the prompt to know that A is correct. B, the Supreme Court First Amendment ruling is an example of common law. This is a tricky one. Is this correct or not? It's a Supreme Court First Amendment ruling. If you stop there, what would you think that that was? A First Amendment ruling. So what's the first, what's that?
You might think it's constitutional because it says First Amendment.
Right.
But it's a ruling, so.
It is making
So
it,
it's common.
making it common. Exactly. That one's designed to sort of trick you a little bit, making sure you understand that when the Supreme Court issues a rule, issues an opinion based on the First Amendment, that rule that they issue is common law. That's not constitutional law. Now, if you're talking about the First Amendment itself, that would be constitutional law, but the court's interpretation of the First Amendment is common law. Okay, so that's testing whether you understand that difference. The First Amendment is an example of constitutional law. Right, easy give there, right? Last one, the Homeland Security Act of 2002 is an example of administrative law.
It's passed by Congress, no?
Right, passed by Congress. So if it was a regulation issued under that law, that would be administrative law. But the law itself, the law passed by Congress, is an example of statutory law. So that one's wrong. Okay, so A, B, and C are correct. And here, if you want to, I have the printouts that I ran with the question and the answers with the correct answers marked. So you can have one if you want one for your reference. But so what I wanted to show you with this is, okay, so number one, this is potentially a difficult question, but it's actually not that difficult at its core if you unpack it into its component parts, and if you understand the material that we discussed to the level of the a few levels up on Bloom's with respect to the learning objectives. So the tests are going to test your knowledge of the learning objectives, not everything that's in that we're surveying. Not here, you can just pass it around. Not necessarily everything that we talk about in class, but the learning objectives. And one of the learning objectives for next week is, what are the four sources of American law? So you need to understand that to a analyzed level on Blues. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so a little scary, I get, but if you calm down, read the question, think about it. If you want to prepare for these tests, there is zero premium on memorizing anything, right? It does you no good to memorize anything. What it does do good for you, though, is to review those learning objectives and make sure you feel comfortable that you understand them more than just at the remember level, more than just can you regurgitate it, more than just can you explain it, but can you apply it to a fact pattern. And there are fact patterns at the end of each chapter if you want to practice. There are, the book has this really nice feature. It has these sample questions, and then it gives you a few pages later the answers. So you can practice reading hypothetical questions, trying to guess the answer, and then having the answer there. That's the best way that you could possibly practice for something like this. Okay? Because when you're taking the test, you have to be able to say, okay, I get this. This is a source of law question, right? You should be able to do that. Then you have your book, you have your reference guide to go look it up if you have to, and then you apply it to the facts. Okay? Good? Everybody understand? Okay. Now, what I plan to do, what I hope to have time to do, but don't always have time, is to do at least 1 or 2 of these every week after we cover the material, so we can just sort of practice it, right? I'll do the best that I can. Just depends on how much time I have and how much time we have in class. Because it does take a lot of time to hand it out, have you do it, talk about it, and we need to make sure we have time for that. Okay, any questions? Yes, Sarah?
Even if we didn't have time to go through it, I mean, even if there was one that was put up on Sakai, I feel like.
Yeah, again, it depends on if I have the time to generate the extra questions. Usually what I do is take questions that I've pulled out of the pool for one reason or another, but I don't always have one for every week. So if I can, I will. Okay. I'll do my best. Okay, any other questions?
Can you say again why the D is not correct?
Okay, D is not correct because the Homeland Security Act of 2002 is a law passed by Congress. when Congress passes a law, that's a statute. That the source of law is statutory law, right? This is saying that Homeland Security Act is an example of administrative law. That's not true because it's not a regulation issued by the TTB, it's the statute itself. The statute that created the law by Congress. That's Congress acting under the Constitution, which is statutory law. It only becomes administrative law when an administrative agency makes a rule or regulation, which is not the case indeed.
So the administration law have to be passed by the agency?
Yeah, well, yeah, created by, yeah. Under authority granted by Congress, right? They call the administrative agencies sometimes the fourth branch of government because we have 3 branches of government that are in the that are mentioned in the Constitution, but quite frankly, the rules and regulations that will govern your business more often than not are written by bureaucrats who work in the federal government under authority delegated to them by Congress.
Or the state.
Or yeah, the same thing happens at the state level too. Yeah, I mean your WACs, your Washington Administrative Code, you're far more often consulting that than you are the RCWs. Yeah.
You tell us what that is.
Right. The RCW is Congress says it's illegal, or we're going to create the TTB to regulate alcohol, and we're going to give them the power to regulate alcohol, and that's all the law will say. And then the TTB goes and says, okay, well, our mandate from Congress is to regulate alcohol, so we're going to make all the rules, and all the specifics are in the regulation, and the statute actually doesn't say very much. That's very common in our system. We'll talk about that next week.
And then people complain to Congress, and then Congress writes more laws to keep TTB from doing what it was told to do.
Right. So if the TTB were to start doing this, and the beer lobby got mad and lobbied Congress, and Congress passes a law that says the TTB can no longer restrict, so Congress would have that power, could wipe out all of that regulation, which they do from time to time. Yeah, Francisco.
Isn't what the Justice Kavanaugh is trying to do? Get rid of all these agencies?
Yeah. So and we're going to get into this in some detail next week, but the court has made a dramatic shift to the right ideologically, and the current majority on the court is very anti-regulation. And so the thinking is that now that they have a locked-in conservative majority, you're going to start seeing more cases challenging regulations and the court overturning more and more of those regulations. That's the thinking anyway, but it's still early. But that seems to be the direction that it's going. Yeah. Okay? Okay. Any other questions? Good. All right. I'm glad we had this talk. So let's move on to, okay, how much time do we have here? We're still okay. All right, so let's start on the legal strategy. Okay, so what do we mean by a legal strategy? I mentioned one earlier, right? The common strategy of papering someone with loads and loads of discovery or something along those lines. What other kinds of legal strategies can you think of? And so thinking about it from a business perspective, what is a, yeah, John?
Hide.
What's that?
Hide.
Hide. Okay, this is something you encountered.
That's most of our work is trying to find people who are hiding.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you have really good ways of doing this. As a client, a former client of mine can attest, because he owed you guys a bunch of money and then thought, well, I'll just move to Missouri. Well, and you have agreements with other states which allow you to find people in other locations. But not every state has such an agreement. So there are some states that it's better to hide in than others. Example, Florida, right? We're familiar with Florida, the debtor's haven. Okay, so in Florida, so I'm giving you some free advice. NUR is benefiting from this class. So if they ask you whether it's worth your time to do, you can tell them that you are learning stuff that you can apply. In Florida, they have what's called an unlimited homestead exemption. What does that mean? That means when you file bankruptcy, the bankruptcy law says that your creditors can't attach your homestead. It's kind of an old school term, which really means your house. Most states have a fairly limited homestead exemption, $50,000, $100,000. So if you have $1 million house and you owe the DOR $2 million, they can come take your house and apply that $1 million to your debt. Except they can't do that in Florida if you file bankruptcy, because in Florida the homestead exemption is unlimited. So what happens is you have these people who know this is going to be a problem. They move to Florida, buy the largest house they can, and file bankruptcy. And then their creditors can't get to their house because it's their homestead. It just happens to be a mansion on the Intercoastal Waterway. So, okay, so that's one example. So there are methods for, as you say, hiding. Okay, there's another really great example of this. When I get clients that say, well, should I form a corporation or an LLC? When I'll often ask them, well, are you planning to default on any debts? Because if you are, it's much better to be an LLC. Why? Because the ownership interest in an LLC is contractual, meaning that it can't be levied, it can be taken, right? Whereas shares of a corporation are what we call chattel paper and are subject to, they're just like any other physical property and they can be taken. If you have an LLC that's making money, all they can take is the money that you get from the LLC. They can't take your interest in the LLC itself. Your creditors can't anyway. Government might be able to sometimes. But that's the difference between a corporation and LLC. So we're just scratching the surface here of strategies that would fall into the legal strategy category that will make a that have a business effect. Can anybody think of any other sort of legal strategy that comes to mind? When you think about business issues, is there any sort of strategy that you can think of that is employed by businesses that would fall under one of these sort of legal categories? Anybody think of something? Yes.
Well, like if you consider employment law,
Okay.
I feel like there's all kinds of them.
Okay.
Where if you want to, for example, with the more recent laws about salary and whether you have to pay workers overtime.
Right.
Then you keep them just under the threshold.
Right.
And in a way, I would consider that a legal strategy.
Yeah, it's absolutely the case. My wife used to work at the YMCA. She still does every once in a while just to keep her free membership. She has another job now. But when Obamacare came into effect, they sent out a memo saying nobody can work more than 30 hours a week. Because under Obamacare, once you cross over a certain threshold of an average number of hours, you have to be provided with the health care under the ACA. So that is absolutely taking a rule, a law, and devising a business strategy that works around it. You can make arguments in this case about the ethics of that. Okay? Are they purposefully now attempting to not provide health insurance to their employees? Yeah, that's absolutely what they're doing, right? Trying to save money. So that's definitely a strategy. Anything else? Can anybody think of anything that is, I have here a couple of things. We have sort of a risk management category of strategy, which is sort of avoiding risk, and then this kind of idea of the difference between offense and defense. So the example here of hiding and the example of managing your HR expenses, those are very defensive strategies. The one I mentioned earlier was probably defensive with a little bit of an offensive flavor. Can anybody think of an offensive, and I don't mean offensive like it smells bad. I mean offense as in, quarterback instead of cornerback, right? Instead of linebacker. What is a strategy that you could pursue offensively that would be beneficial to your business that has a legal flavor to it? Can anybody think of one? Yeah.
Well, if you basically go into an environment and create what you want,
Okay.
and then eventually you might have regardless of whether you're acting legally or ethically, you might then have the persuasive power to change it.
Okay. And there's an example of that.
Uber.
Uber is a classic example of that. Do it first, and then once it becomes so important to everybody, then we'll get waivers, right? Better to ask for forgiveness than permission sometimes, right? Yeah, Sarah?
Isn't there a law about, and I might be wrong on this, isn't there a law about there having to be like pumping space for mothers? So if you do provide a nice space and not just some back room closet, you could attract maybe more employees, more diverse employee base.
Yeah, and you see companies do this all the time. They fight tooth and nail the imposition of a restriction. And then once it's in place, they comply, and then they make these glossy commercials about how wonderful they are because they're doing these things that now the government has forced them to do. So in that case, they're using it as a marketing strategy in a sense, right? Another really great example of an offensive strategy is in intellectual property, which we'll talk about a little bit. But there's actually this strategy that many of these large companies like Google and Microsoft and these companies, they get sued a lot for patent infringement. One of the things they do is they go out and just buy up companies that own patents, even though they have no plan ever of using those patents. But so it's this offensive but also defensive. And when they get sued from somebody else, they say, well, you know what, we have a bunch of patents that you're violating, so why don't we just call it even? No, I mean, there's some theory that the entire reason that Google bought, was it Motorola, the Motorola's mobile business, was purely for this reason, for acquiring its patent portfolio, to then have in its defensive strategy, to make it part of its defensive strategy. Yeah.
Would it be a strategy to just hyper insure and then just go do whatever you want?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. The problem is with insurance is that most insurance companies aren't that stupid, and if you over-insure to a certain degree, you won't make any money. Yeah. If you insure every risk away, the cost of the insurance potentially could be more than you stand to gain, right? And lots of insurance have certain amounts of self-insurance. That's why we have things like deductibles, because otherwise you would just buy the insurance and go be crazy and let the insurance company take that's why they have things like deductibles. But it is a strategy. Excessive or over-insurance is definitely a strategy used for this reason. Yeah. Great.
Can you like move your headquarters from one state to a different state?
You sure can. Yeah. Heck yeah. And in fact, companies do this all the time. They use the threat of moving their headquarters in order to get tax relief or changes in laws. Anybody follow? I was just telling the story. My brother-in-law was in town. He's from California. He was asking about the whole head tax thing in Seattle. Anybody follow that story? This was last year, right? So anybody know the story? No? Yeah. Well enough? Okay. Anybody? Me? Yeah. Anyone? Yeah.
I believe it's for corporations in Seattle have to start paying a head count, well, a tax per head count.
Right.
Which would result in insanely huge taxes.
Right. Right.
And I believe Amazon was highly offended by it and threatened to move headquarters.
Yeah. Yeah, well, Amazon just happened to be in the process of this HQ2 thing, right? Mm-hmm. And Seattle says we have this big homeless problem, and part of that problem is created by these big corporations who are bringing all these high-paying jobs in, which are then squeezing out the affordable housing. So we're going to make them pay for part of the solution. We're going to charge them a per head tax, and they passed it with much fanfare. And shockingly, about 10 days later, they repealed it. Right. Now, you got to wonder what was happening behind the scenes there, right? And I can pretty much guess what this transcription of this call between Jeff Bezos and Jimmy Durkin was like, right? Yeah. It pretty much was either repeal this or we just move everybody to HQ2, right? And sure enough, gone, right? That kind of stuff happens all the time. So that is using the political system, the leverage of the financial power that these companies have to actually affect the legal system, actually change the law. So there's a ton that we can dive into here, and we're going to be diving into a ton of it. But almost all of it has some ethical implication. And what I want you to be thinking about, so like I mentioned earlier, Do you paper over? Do you kill your customer's case, even though they're in the right and you're in the wrong, but use your market power to your advantage? Will you do that or not? Your shareholders would probably tell you to do that, but you have to decide where you are on the ethics spectrum before you make those kinds of choices. So I'm going to give you a few chances. I think we're right at our next break. So why don't we do this? We're actually like 5 minutes early. Let's take our break. When you come back, grab one of these. There's 3 scenarios on here that I'd like your group to consider, and then we'll talk about them. So take your break, 5-minute break, and then come back and take 10 minutes or so to go through the scenarios. And I need your team sheets. I do not the charters. You can keep. And have cookies, please. Have lots of them.
I feel like that would help.
Okay. Yeah.
In like real situations. Like people share my experience.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
So as a issue, I don't get on yet on time for this class.
Oh, okay, well, we can maybe not. They actually fix that right now.
Yeah, but we'll have a compromise.
Yeah.
Because they're like strong.
Okay.
I like the charter. Yeah. I felt like.
And
I don't want to
screw over.
take it away from the
It's two issues.
And I'm not gonna take the aggressive.
I actually,
So.
Are really instructive. And
getting like, because you have all these.
Captain Josh and
It's for like hunting and making that kind of stuff. So it's like all the clothing lines that it's like every year they're coming out with new ones. It's like, oh, sweet. It's a little older that still good. Bring them together.
tries to congratulate soldiers, but then.
Kind of outlet. I don't know. So it gives me life just to look at myself. It's not the newest, greatest. It's still a good year. Yeah. But I don't even know how you feel about it.
Yeah. They did,
Yeah.
they
You said you did
posted
that,
the
right?
major list before it was.
The business proposal thing,
Yeah, that was.
the show sheets for spring, like that. So like a business and present it.
Oh, I
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
Somebody did.
Okay, yeah, what usually happens is they, it's like.
Which that would be cool. But
So, if you have trouble,
Okay.
get
Wait, like, see what other.
Uh-huh.
No, one that first place. Did it finish? I think it's done. I can go on 10, I might just go walk through it. Yeah, see what's there, what people have come up with.
Yeah, that was another big one. I was talking to
Yeah, it's hard.
them about it. And they wanted.
What's that?
Did you look at it? I can't pull up about it. Oh, everything.
Yeah.
Really?
Made you wonder if it
That's
was one
awesome.
of those pages that.
You spy house over
Half
there?
a pound.
Yeah, it's 500. People are really friendly. Yeah. We'll just go play. We'll put it on somebody.
I mean,
These guys. A couple times. A couple of times. Yeah. I was shocked by how this was. You're in time out there, buddy? Yeah. I'm not with them. They're very friendly. I mean, they were friendly because they were. No. That to me at least, compared to, like I said, they were all very serious. Like, I would expect, it was like no street vendor, you can barter with them, it was just like, you walk into the store, there was usually like, well, you can see the personal liability. Just in general, that's what they are. They kind of very conservative. Yeah. They're happy, they smile, they're like that, yeah. You seem like you
You didn't learn that before?
Where you can find
I was ready to put it around.
That's how I know, right? By the time you get around to the thing, they move to money.
It wasn't great. Lots of salmon.
I like to see that. I mean, we went to the seafood places, they have to do that to work, like, we got some good things. Yeah.
Oh, that one got called into, right?
Well, I mean, there's bonding companies.
Yeah.
That,
I mean, yeah, you gotta
they
read it.
investigate people, and give them good ratings because they're good people. And there's other bonding companies, they'll hand it out like candy because they know it's money. And so we can help.
Yeah.
Because people
Yeah.
that go rough,
Yeah.
they run their.
We can see where
And they don't.
This is not, it depends where you would bond.
Yes, that's right. That's cool. Yeah, because people will say, hey, if we went to 50%, you know, I'll.
I don't know. Well,
Oh, you mean?
Yeah, it's gonna go see your husband and then.
That's a lot.
No, it's a group dinner. Monday,
Take a test.
and then lunches too.
No, Monday, Thursday, Friday. Yeah, that day too. Yeah, right? No.
Yeah, Saturday.
That's very different.
No,
Mine's like a.
No, Saturday.
So like, everything.
We did both.
It's like.
Hire a contractor or
I would
All this
say.
stuff, as long as it's like.
Oh, I didn't make you guys happy, but I would be.
And that's kind of how it's like.
I did have to.
So it's like.
I'm so sorry.
We were trying.
The girl I stole from you at the club.
Yeah. I was in no position. It's all good.
This guy here before. He's going like, he's like, I was like, come on.
Yeah, no, we were like, we gotta go.
She disappeared. No, like,
That was my shit. I was like, everyone's got a defense dance. You guys needed it.
she did something. She did.
I read
The lobby.
Oh,
Christina.
Her friend was cool.
Her friend was an actor.
Theater actor, yeah.
all the time, and now we're like, I'm getting my own page. And he's gone.
That kept us going.
Right.
In the mat, you're back.
I was glad the bus driver didn't want.
I'm just gonna sell my house.
I know.
Then I'll be.
That's when it started partying.
Not once you know.
There's like two times where you almost hit something. Just like,
Oh, yeah.
Right, but that avoids the whole reason for doing it, right? Yeah. So like you sell it at fair market value.
Monday's pretty bad too.
Yeah. Run into it.
People are actually very private. I would
And
I
I
did that Mexico City too. That was crazy.
You know. I know. Yeah, it's usually, yeah.
This cars, I'm throwing shit.
We have very common.
He's taking some type of medical.
Really?
I love that method.
Yeah.
I read it all.
Everyone just do what they want.
Out of state.
Dude, I got. Look what
So what's the
I feel a little I don't know. Yeah, yeah, my feet all sore, but I it was a
I think politically possible. The state is just having further and further more the state legislature is a lot more visible. So eventually, you probably have a big enough majority that they can pass. You'll never get to Republicans. Yeah, sure. Our system is terrible.
Germany,
But it's one of those things where, they've been saying, you look at, the immigration, some of that, like so for immigration for
That's probably better all it's gonna be.
Probably want to,
it's been broken since, but that doesn't mean we actually fix it.
Just think outside.
Yeah. But the problem is, you do a capital gains tax and you've got billions of dollars. That's not linked against it. Every billionaire in Washington, are going to line up their money and it's going to be very hard politically.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the incomes, the higher.
I see how that
I think you have massive political.
Military jargon, he's like, oh, that.
Yeah, well, we're still, talking some.
What? Am I red?
There's a lot of red around. Well.
I don't like all the questions off.
Right, yeah, which is the case in most.
Now that the governor's running for president.
Yeah. Okay, let's come back so we have time to finish everything. So let's look at our first scenario. So you're employed by a large company that is being sued by a former employee who was terminated. Okay, this is kind of was one I already mentioned. Is terminated by her manager because of the color of her skin. Your company fired the manager, but is now being sued. You have information in your files that would prove conclusively that the employee embezzled money from the company while you employed her. Would you use the information about the embezzlement in a countersuit to attack the former employee as part of your defense against the discrimination claim? So the person was discriminated against. They suffered a harm because of that. But in a completely unrelated set of facts, they embezzled money. So do you use that in your defense, or is it the right thing to do to pay the employee for compensation for the discrimination that they suffered? Yes or no?
I'm gonna go with, I would use it in my defense, despite the termination not being fair, in fact, it was based on the color of your skin. the termination would have been imminent due to the embezzlement. So,
She would have gotten fired anyway.
yeah, so, while one person's bad choices does look bad upon the company did the right thing by letting go of that person 10 times.
Okay, all right, yeah,
I
Francisco.
mean, it's cynical on her to be suing the company.
Uh-huh.
In that sense, she's doing something wrong to the company, then something is wrong done to her, then she's like, okay, I'm gonna sue now, I would use it too, just counter sue it, I think you just call it out of the court, like, hey, you were doing this, let's call it good, settle it.
Does anybody have the other perspective? Does anybody think that this is an unethical thing to do? Yeah.
I think these two things are different.
Yeah.
You should do it separately.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you think that they should pay her compensation for her discrimination and then separately deal with that?
Yeah.
Okay. And then just offset the two, maybe. Yeah. Yeah, it's true. It would be, most of the time, if the, I don't know if everybody heard Melissa, it would cost so much money to do it separately. Most of the time, this is my opinion, litigation does not pencil out. It almost never pays to sue or to defend a lawsuit. We'll talk about this more later. The economics of litigation are very bad. So even when you have a really good claim, it's often more expensive to try to pursue that claim than the claim is worth. So that ends up being the case fairly frequently. Yeah.
In the case of the embezzlement, though, you wouldn't have to countersue. You could just threaten to inform the prosecutor.
Okay.
And the prosecutor could take all the expenses,
Mm-hmm.
and then you could use that as a settlement lever.
Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with the criminal definition of blackmail? No, I'm serious. It's actually illegal to threaten to, in some cases, it's illegal to threaten the disclosure of a criminal act in an effort to extract something from somebody.
So you'd have to contact the prosecutor first to
Right.
disclose it, and then.
In which case you've lost all the leverage.
Okay.
Yeah. No, you guys are zeroing in on exactly the dynamics here. These are the kinds of situations that you're sometimes presented with. Anybody else think that you shouldn't use the embezzlement facts in the discrimination case? In some courts, it's they don't let you do it, depending on the circumstances. You can't use it as a defense in some cases if you knew about the embezzlement and didn't fire her, but then the discrimination occurred and then you want to use the embezzlement, you can't. In some cases, courts won't let you. If you knew about it and didn't act on it, didn't fire her, and then she proves discrimination, then you're barred from using the embezzlement as a defense in the discrimination case. Yeah, do you have something? Okay. Yeah.
But could you then sue her later on for the embezzlement?
Sure. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and if you paid her a bigger enough settlement, then you have money to go after, right? Yeah.
If the company's stance is like no discrimination, but that one specific manager was racist and there was no indication of that previously though,
Yeah.
couldn't you fight that manager should be the one that's being sued and not the company?
Well, the problem is, and we'll talk about the concept of agency in this class. Agency is sort of a core legal concept, and the fact is that when employees do bad things, the employer is responsible. So in that case, unless they act dramatically outside of the scope of their employment, it's the employer that's on the hook for it. And in fact, in most states, the law says the employer is legally obligated to indemnify the employee. In other words, to step in and defend the case in their place. So unless he was completely outside of the scope of employment, it's very unlikely that, I'm assuming the manager, whoever the manager is, whatever the gender of the manager is, that the manager is unlikely to suffer any personal liability for that. Okay, and so something to keep in mind when I talk about risk, one of the riskiest things that you can do when you start a company, the riskiest thing is employee number one. As soon as you take on an employee, you are taking on the risk and liability for everything that employee does in your home. Okay, we'll get into that. Lots of fun. Okay, any other questions on scenario one? Okay, scenario two, your company owns some intellectual property rights, which are questionable, but you have significant resources. Your lawyers suggest you send cease and desist letters to anyone using any intellectual property which is even close to your alleged rights. The lawyers suggest that you use your resources to threaten expensive lawsuits even though you have little chance of winning if they were to defend the cases. If you did not have the protection of this intellectual property, it is estimated your company would suffer significant loss of revenue and profits. Would you pursue this strategy? How many of you would do this or would not do this? Any thoughts? Melissa, did you?
I just had a question, like
Yeah.
the part that says like the intellectual property rights are questionable, what
Yeah.
does that mean?
It just means that you're claiming, let's say you're claiming a trademark, but the reality is what you're claiming trademark to is not really trademarkable and would be easy to defeat. Okay, and so this actually happens all the time. Yeah.
I mean, I guess it would depend on who else is using those.
Okay.
Trademark, and if it's smaller companies, then yeah, you can go ahead and do that, but if it's other bigger companies, then.
Except that there's a rule that says that if someone's violating your intellectual property and you don't act to protect it, then you can lose it. And this is particularly true in the case of trademarks. This is why companies often will pursue trademark infringement against little companies. You know, that's why they go and show up at these swap meets and try to get these vendors that are selling fake Gucci bags. Because if they don't, then someone could say, you're not trying to protect it. So it's no longer valuable and you can have it canceled. So, yeah.
I can agree with you. Adding to that, it did state that there's significant resources, so
Yeah.
why not?
Yeah.
If you have the lawyers, you have the funds, why
Okay.
not take those precautionary measures?
Yeah.
And then try to maybe figure out a different business strategy.
Yeah, well, the why not is you don't really have these rights. At the end of the day, what you're doing is using their money to effectively protect something from other people being able to use in contravention of what the law would otherwise allow.
So if you're not actually defending any intellectual properties, you don't have any.
Well, so the way this works is you make the claim. So you're pretending that you have it,
Right.
but you know that you'll lose if someone challenges.
But like what we were just talking about, like Gucci bags,
Yeah.
we're not in a position, or like in the scenario, you're not in a position where you would be losing your intellectual property rights if you didn't send out these letters.
Well, in theory you would, because this is actually based on a real case. You know what the real case is? No, it's actually the Seattle Seahawks. Okay, the Seattle Seahawks claim to own the white 12 on a blue background. Yeah, no, seriously, and they will send cease and desist letters to little vendors that sell donuts with a 12 on it, claiming that they have this right, which they don't. And if someone sued them and pursued it all the way, would absolutely win that case. But the Seahawks have Paul Allen billions. And so they can go around and bully everybody on Etsy who tries to sell something that has a white 12 on a blue background.
But so what's like, if you get one of those letters that says, please,
Mhm.
send us this, you need to stop
Right.
putting this 12 on your cupcake.
That's right.
And if you just ignore it, what happens?
Then in theory, they would sue you for trademark infringement.
But if they don't have the rights and you just said that
Yeah,
you
well
could
then,
win, so you would have
because
to shell out the money and
Right.
go to court.
you would have to go up,
and fight it.
you would have to go up against Paul Allen to win your case.
Could you sue him for legal fees if you win it? No, you're stuck.
Because they're just trying to protect
Right,
their,
right.
but if they don't have the intellectual
Right.
property.
That's
like-
exactly right. That's exactly right, because there's a NASCAR driver that has a blue car and is number 12. I don't follow NASCAR, but apparently it's true. And so the fact is that they don't have this exclusive ownership, but they use their money to effectively create a right that otherwise doesn't exist. Okay,
What
now,
about other sports teams
Huh?
that have blue 12 jerseys?
yeah. Well, there isn't another team that uses the 12 in the same way that the Seahawks do. And in fact, well, we can go along into this. You all know the story about the 12th man, right? You know why they don't use 12th man anymore?
A&M.
What's that? Texas A&M, right, yeah. So they got tired of paying a license fee to Texas A&M, and so they sent a memo to Pete Carroll and said, from now on, at the end of the game, when you win, don't thank the 12th man, thank the 12. So, and they changed it. And they did that to try to capture something that they otherwise wouldn't know. Okay, so this is very common, a very common strategy. And it's not uncommon. In fact, I've had several clients over the years who have gotten these cease and desist letters from some company that says, you're using our name and you need to stop or we're going to sue you. And the client says, well, what do I do? You look it up, and, well, probably kind of a bullshit thing, but it's going to cost you $100,000 or more to defend it. So it's probably better to just change your name. It's less expensive to change your name. So these big companies using their dollars to force these little companies into changing their names or changing their logos, even though they probably wouldn't win the case if they pursued.
And how much money are they really like saving by pursuing these efforts?
Well, what it is it's an intimidation strategy. It's intimidating others from doing the same thing. Right? So they can maximize the number of products that they can sell with the 12 line. Yeah.
And markup.
Right. Okay. Okay. Any other thoughts on that? I'll tell you that if you're the business manager in a business like this, you're going to be hard pressed not to do it. Because if you don't, you would lose the ability to sell all those products that you're selling with the Y12. Okay, you work for a large company that sells services which are heavily reliant on the individual employees that deliver the service. Your company has recently lost some key employees to competitors, and your bosses are livid. Your bosses ask you to hire lawyers to draft very restrictive non-competition agreements that they want all employees to sign. You hire a law firm who advises you that the non-competition agreements with the terms that your bosses propose are unenforceable. After reporting your findings to your bosses, they direct you to require all employees to sign them anyway, just to make them fear legal retribution if they leave to work for a competitor. What would you do? Yes?
Okay, so this is really funny. I've actually captured this poem.
So have I.
And so these agreements, they're not enforceable.
Right.
Just because they're so restrictive,
Right.
Especially when it's in a right to work state.
Right.
So it's pretty funny just because the legal team from our competitor sent us over all these letters saying, this person who currently works for you used to work for us, they signed a non-compete clause, blah, 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 but it's not enforceable. Yeah,
but would you still force your employees to sign it just on the theory that they might think twice about working somewhere else, even though you know that at the end of the day that is totally unenforceable?
I don't think so, just because anyone has the ability to go to Google and say like, hey, is this even enforceable?
Yeah.
They can read up on it, so I don't think I would.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, Francisco, I think first, and then Sarah.
No way. I think I would just leave to the competitor too, because they're clearly offering better benefits. I mean, this company's not addressing their root cause, right? Which is why are people leaving? They just have instill fear. That already works for so long anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm out.
You'd be surprised how often it happens though. Sarah? Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I would try to negotiate with the boss and see if we could work the root problem. And if not, then I would leave myself also.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah, kind of piggybacking on there, it's like, if we have enough money to hire a law firm to look into this issue, we might be able to offer incentives for people to stay.
Yeah.
Or like restructure our company so people are wanting to continue working for us as opposed to like moving somewhere.
Yeah, and those are all great suggestions, and they would work in the places I worked at because this exact same problem came up. You know, I told them these are unenforceable, and in fact, in California they changed the law. It's illegal to do this. In California, you cannot force an employee to sign a non-compete agreement that is otherwise unenforceable. Because they've been unenforceable by law for a long time in California, and companies were doing just what I described here. They were writing up these agreements that they knew were unenforceable, but they still made their employees sign them, hoping that it would make them think twice about leaving for a competitor. So it's basically using this legal strategy to intimidate people. And California said enough of that and made it patently illegal, but it's the only place I know of where it's actually illegal to do this, and you see this happen all the time. Because bosses lose their connection to reality, right? They're upset because the competitor took their employees, and rather than examining themselves and saying, what can we do to keep that from happening? They say, I want to sue them. I want to sue them right now, right now. I've been in this exact conversation. You know, this is because, and they don't want to hear, well, maybe you're a shitty boss. Maybe they left because you're terrible. Maybe they left because they're getting paid more and being treated well over there, right? They don't want to hear that. What they want to hear instead is, let's get our lawyers, let's make people sign these, you know, let's intimidate people. Okay, so just something to keep in mind, that when we're looking at strategy, we're not always saying, okay, well, what's the law and what's the right thing? And sometimes we're using these rules, we're trying to manipulate them to get the outcome we want, even though it's something we may not even actually be entitled to, or maybe even illegal to do. Okay, and you will find this kind of thing in the business world all the time. And the arguments that you are all making, which are all fantastic arguments, won't work. You will not convince your bosses. So if you are willing to leave that job, then that would be your one solution. But this will be a flavor, you'll have a flavor of this almost guaranteed if you work in the corporate world for long enough. Yeah.
Aren't they opening up themselves to a lawsuit or trying to force their employees to sign that?
Yeah, only in California where it's illegal, but it's not illegal to do that here. So, you know, you'd have to figure out what would the claim be.
So what if business, I don't know, went crazy and decided, I had a friend who was a barista who had to sign one of those saying she couldn't work at any of the other independent coffee stands. Yeah. Here in Washington, like within a 20-mile radius. Yeah. But I mean, that's enforceable in some cases, if they're narrow enough. But if it says you can't work at an independent coffee stand anywhere in Washington, that would be unenforceable. Now, if you're in California, non-competes are unenforceable, full stop. So it depends on the law. Yeah. So this is why you have to know, sort of another theme you'll hear a lot of, and I've had clients, I can tell you war stories about this, that have lost their businesses because they were successful and decided to expand to California, and it's a whole other world down there. The rules are completely different, and you can't do business in California like you do in Washington, and vice versa. And so when sometimes you've got to know or have people who know the differences before you embark on that kind of a strategy. So that's building strategy, legal strategy into your expansion plans. So yeah.
Would you say, from my personal opinion, that the state of California is more of an employee-favored state?
That's not even a question. I mean, that's by an order of magnitude more employee favored.
Do you think Washington's becoming that way?
No, not in the. I mean, Washington's not as bad as some of the red states in the South, for example. I mean, there's a reason why when foreign automakers come here and build plants, they build them in the South, because they're very unfriendly to labor in those places. I think we're somewhere kind of in the middle, but nothing like California, New York, Massachusetts. Those sorts of places are not even, we're not even in the same league as them when it comes to employee protections. Yep, we'll be talking about that in the employment section. Okay, anything else? Okay, so what I want you to do with these, what my point here is, I want you to be thinking through the ethical lens when we look at some of these things. Sometimes you might say, well, this is the right answer from a business perspective, but you really should take a pause sometimes and say, is this really the right thing? Would I actually do this? And I think you'll be surprised when you get into the real world how often you're put in a position like this where there's a push and pull between what the right thing to do is and what the right ethical thing to do is. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, so last thing we're going to do is just talk quickly about negotiation. This is segment C, and so segment C actually has two components to it. One of them is understanding what conflict is. Okay, that's one part of it, and then the other part of it is understanding how to negotiate and practicing different tools and techniques for negotiation. So it's really the two things. So we're going to start off first by kind of trying to define the term conflict. So the question is, can you define the term conflict without using any negative terms? Can you define conflict using only positive words? Okay, it's a little harder than it sounds. So what I'm going to do is have you work with your groups, and I'll give you about 10 minutes to do this. And so we have this little form here that you can use as a guide, and you've got 4 questions that you have to ask. So how does the definition of conflict affect the way we think about conflict? What are some of the negative consequences of conflict? What are some of the positive consequences? And then to list 4 potential positive outcomes of conflict in an organization. Okay? So start off by thinking, can you define it using only positive terms? And then answer these 4 questions. And then we will come back. I'll give you about 10 minutes to do that.
Yeah, there you go.
There should be enough for everyone to have one. Yeah. And this is just for your own purpose. You don't have to turn it back in.
Yeah, so I'll definitely try to do these questions and
That's what we've been doing.
Like, I think conflict does usually have a negative, so somebody's like, where the conflict comes up, I automatically feel a little bit of defensive.
Yeah.
Every reaction.
Yeah, like when you think about that, so you're like, yeah, if you're thinking that it's negative going in, you're gonna already be like, what am I? It's, you know, it's a conflict.
I have to defend.
Yeah.
Defend whatever, yeah, it's not just gonna be a discussion.
It doesn't matter if they're right. Yeah, it's positive conflict will bring up new connections. So like, you can bring it up. You might have been thought of before. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I feel kind of drunk. I said that word. I'm getting tired. I didn't mean to say that out loud.
That happens in the last half hour, yeah.
Like our definition?
Or like, I think, kind of general, how to define it.
Yeah.
So fun.
Sit for some classes.
Yeah, it's more as an obstacle.
Sounds like PE.
Chemistry.
Yeah.
Different ideas that result in a constructive outcome. I mean, it's under coordinator at work. The boss said, which one? No, think about it, what in the mail, and if they explain it to you, then they don't know. And if your mind, you see there, like, state,
Yeah. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
The one was on.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's like a little wide, like, to watch these things.
No, I didn't know about it. It's even yesterday, I think. Because there's so much of like one way or another.
Pretty open.
I'm sure there's a lot. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are really.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I was like, my roommate is from Australia, and she was like, I said it was like 17 degrees. So I was just like, and I was like, ridiculous. So I've never been to Central America. I've always seen everybody else. My mom is so good. She's from like, what?
All right. I'm assuming if we're watching videos that we finished. So, all right. So, anyone want to take a stab at this defining the term conflict without using a negative term? Anybody have a thought on that? Yes, Doreen.
More than one idea.
Okay. More than one idea. Okay, that's great. So sometimes we have two different ideas, but there's more than one. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, differing ideas on an issue.
Okay, different ideas and yeah.
I said difference of opinion.
Difference of opinion. Okay, so right. So sometimes we can both maybe be right. We have two different opinions on the same topic, and we can maybe both be right. Yeah.
A place of open communication.
Okay, good. Open communication, right? Because if we don't know that the other side has a different opinion, then we can't communicate about it, right? So having a place that you can discuss it. Anything else? Anyone else? So conflict is not always negative, right? The term has a negative connotation to it, but there's a lot of positive that can come from it. So how does the definition of it? How does that affect the way you think about the term? First question, how does the definition of conflict affect the way we think about conflict itself? Yes?
Just when the word's initially said, it makes me feel defensive right away.
Okay.
Even though that's not how I typically handle those types of situations, just the physical reaction, physiological, whatever the word is, reaction to it.
Yeah, okay, physiological action, yeah.
It always says that you're supposed to avoid conflict.
Right.
You can't, I mean, just might as well try to turn into something positive.
Yeah, right, okay. So it's avoid, right? It's defensive. What else? Anyone else?
Anxiety.
Okay, yeah, creates anxiety for sure, right? Yeah.
Often viewed as like there's like a winner and a loser.
Okay, right. So someone has to win and someone has to just conflict, and we can't both win. So all very negative ideas, right? When you hear that word, the first thing you think about is negative. And we've already talked like some of the negative consequences of conflict. What happens when conflict goes bad, right? What are the negative consequences?
Both parties are off worse than what they originally started with.
Right. Okay. So it can be a lose-lose situation. There's plenty of lose-lose situations in conflict, right?
But there's no resolution.
There's no resolution, right? The conflict doesn't go away. And sometimes maybe and one of the things we're going to be talking about in one of the strategies is sometimes the best solution is not to come to a conclusion. Sometimes the best alternative to a negotiated solution is no negotiation at all, is to not solve the problem. over having a bad deal to solve it, right? Okay, what else? Any other negative consequences of conflict that you can think of, in the business context in particular? Yeah.
Like burn bridges or rash decisions were made.
Burn bridges, suffer negative publicity, right? Yeah.
You could make the morale of your business go down.
Right, bad morale if there's too much conflict, and depending on how that conflict is, for sure, yeah.
False assumptions.
False assumptions, okay, so sometimes conflict is based on misinformation, fake news, right? Anything else? Any other, yeah.
I feel like it could jeopardize potential networking relationships.
Okay.
So the person you're not agreeing with, they might have networking connections with other folks who now are siding with one side as opposed to, so I feel like it could definitely jeopardize that.
Okay, jeopardizing relationships, which all leads to the one thing that shareholders care about the most, right? Which is what?
Lots of money.
Right. Did you lose more money because of it? Right, that's ultimately what shareholders care about. Okay, what are some of the positive outcomes of conflict? What good can come of it? Yeah, go.
Afterwards, you could become a more cohesive unit.
Right, you could solve the problem and be better off for it, yeah. New ideas, right? You might come to a solution that you didn't even know about until the conflict was resolved, yes.
Understand each other's situation more.
Okay, that's very true. Sometimes from the result of conflict is better understanding. Sometimes we can reach a better level of understanding by working through these conflicts, right? Yeah.
Keep you from getting complacent.
Okay.
In business or business owner.
Right, forces you to make changes, forces you to get better, get smarter. Certainly that's the case a lot of times with legal conflict. The result sometimes of being sued is that it exposes the weakness that you can fix and get better. Anything else? Any other positive outcomes? Okay, so I think we sort of 3 and 4 sort of overlap, right? Okay, so what I want you to see here is that conflict itself is not always negative, has a huge negative connotation, but it is impossible to avoid. It's absolutely part of every business, every single day. And in my world, in the legal world, it's what keeps us in business, right? If there wasn't conflict, you wouldn't need any lawyers. So I always say this, if we all just treated each other reasonably, if we all acted reasonably and treated each other with respect, you wouldn't need hardly any lawyers. The fact is that we, particularly in the United States in our culture here, is we like to be a-holes. Seriously. I've told this story, those of you who had 303, I'm sure I've told this story. And I'll end with this, that I was on a conference call once with one of my least favorite counterparties of all times, GE Capital. And they were working on a financing transaction. And in their agreement said that they reserved the right to act in this particular paragraph. They said that they had sole discretion to act. And I said, well, I'd like to change the sole discretion to reasonable discretion. I'd like you to only be able to take this action that this paragraph gives you the power for if you act reasonably. And the general, she wasn't the super high general counsel, but she was from the general counsel's office at GE Capital, said in this super condescending tone on this conference call with all these people on it, we really, really need to reserve the right to act unreasonably. And she said that, and I was sitting in this call, like my jaw dropped. I was like, this is someone on a conference call in front of all these people saying, we need to reserve the right to act unreasonably. We contractually want this right. I tell that story because this is the world that we live in, right? These are the people you're going to have to do business with. People who act unreasonably. Not only do they act unreasonably, they want the right, the contract to give them the power to act unreasonably. Okay, so when you're dealing with people like that, you need a whole different set of tools to get the outcome that's best for you, particularly when you lack the leverage. And in most cases, unless you end up working, unless you're the very, some people have lots of leverage, but most of us, in most situations, you're gonna find that you lack leverage or lack as much leverage as you'd like to have. You don't get to dictate the terms. You have to try to convince somebody who has more power in the situation than you do to reach an outcome that is beneficial or as beneficial as possible to you. That's what we're going to be experimenting with in segment C. So we're going to first spend a few weeks really trying to dive down to this question of what is conflict, really understand conflict. Then we're going to move into, that's sort of the first chunk of it. And the next chunk of it, we will spend some time looking at different negotiation tools and systems, theories. And then you're going to put all of that to work after spring break, when you're going to have lots and lots and lots and lots of conflict manufactured by me for this express purpose. And you'll have plenty of opportunity to experiment with different techniques to try to achieve outcomes in an environment where the worst case is you don't win the chocolate bar. This is the time to experiment with this kind of thing. And I think, and I hope, I really hope that you'll agree with me by the end of this, that this all kind of comes together at the end. It seems a little disjointed from the beginning, and I recognize that, but it will all come together in this sort of magical way if it works right. And I hope that that's the experience that you have. Okay, let's see. So next week in segment A, we are doing law and society. This is the basic background stuff. The thing like the sample test questions, constitutional law, difference between criminal law and civil law and all that stuff. So make sure you've read the Sakai material. There is a sources of law, there's an assignment. It's pretty easy, and we will go over it in class. The segment B, we're going to look at the strategic decision to breach and pay or not pay. So sometimes what happens is you just or pay the fine. So in some cases you look and you say you've signed a contract that says you can't do X, but the penalty for X is $10. And so like, okay, we'll just do it and pay, right? We're just going to strategically breach and just pay the fine. And we're going to look at that as a business decision, whether that makes sense. There's an article about this, and then this video I've actually used in 303, so it might be familiar to you. This is the Ford Pinto case, and this is Milton Friedman making the argument that the whole question about whether Ford should have spent the $11 to put the part on the Pinto to keep it from exploding was really just a question of price and not a question of ethics. So it's a very kind of mind-bending video sometimes if you think through the arguments that he's making. In segment C, we dig into these conflict sources and solutions. There's an article on that I want to make sure that you've read, and we'll be covering that in the segment C. Okay, so the sources of law, assignment is due, and then this is the preparation, and that's what we've got going for next week. Yeah.
All of the extra readings, all this kind of material items, those are going to be in the weekly
they're
segments, right?
Let me see if it didn't log me out. Hopefully, okay. So if you look in the weekly lessons, and then week 2, and you'll notice, and you notice my cool iconography, right? This is I really think this is cool. Here, this is what it looks like to you. So in segment A, you'll find here, this is the legal topic survey. You'll find the learning objectives, and then sometimes it's content that I've written and that you'll just be able to read here. There are links to things sometimes that I will want you to read. And here's the assignment, for example, the sources of law assignment. This is just things you can look at for your own reference. It's a list of places where you can find statutory law and constitutional law. So everything you need is going to be on the page. And this is true for each of the segments. So for each week, there will always be a segment A, a segment B, and a segment C page with everything that you need. Yes?
So with the test associated with whatever week.
Yeah.
Will the test be specifically to that week and what we've learned?
To
or
those weeks,
To
yeah.
the weeks, okay. the
Yeah,
weeks
it's not
prior.
cumulative.
Okay.
Yeah, so once we move on to the next material,
Okay.
you don't have to worry about the previous material. We just kind of do it in chunks. Otherwise, it's too unwieldy, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions?
Is next week the lecture?
I don't, is next week the lecture?
Yeah.
Oh, it is, okay.
There's a lecture on
Yeah, the one we go to, I don't think is next week. Because the one next week is not on a Wednesday, it's on a Tuesday. So the lecture we go to is Jen O'Hare lecture in March, I think. Yeah, and she's actually a good friend of mine, so I was the one who recommended her for that. So, yeah. Okay, we're done. Take a cookie on your way out, please. Yes, oh, I need your name tags. Yes, please let me have your name tags on the way out. That's how I know you're here.
Yeah. These are how, presentations, business casual. Slide that ahead.
Oh, yeah.
Like every time.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Oh, boy.
Oh, yeah, thanks.
I started Department of Revenue 10 years.
Yeah, good question. So I was working
taught
on
a lot of places.
LA, and this is something that was lived in LA for years. But nobody in except for black people. But when I was growing up,
Well, she talked about elementary.
yeah, exactly, right. And actually started like a little bit before that. Yeah, I mean, I'm an 85 bears full over. But you know, what I liked about them at the time, what I remember is that all the teams that had like disco uniforms, the Bears, black shoes, black socks, and Mike Ditko was their coach. They were old school, and I loved that about them. And that was kind of what drew me to them. Because like the Rams at the time, the Rams actually went to the Super Bowl in 1980, but it was in Chicago, like disco 70s. And so when I was growing up, I was just telling the story the other day actually. I remember just did you get access? Okay, let me know. In fifth grade, currency in fifth grade were football pencils. And they made these like pencils that came in packs like this. And each one was the, color of the team. And so when you bought one, of course you couldn't buy a pack of one team. And so it was up, exactly. And the ones that had the most currency in those days were, everyone was either a Cowboys fan, a Steelers fan.
And so did you go?
I got all the Bears. Absolutely. Yeah. And so, growing up in every time, we had two teams because the Raiders were in LA. But no was a fan of either one of those teams, right? So it's just kind of an LA thing, and you can see that now because the Rams, they were there before, right? But now the Chargers, and they cancel any tickets. And it cracks me up because people in LA, like, I don't think it's a $3 billion stadium. I am not buying tickets to that, LA.
Where is it?
Not going to support the Chargers.
It's so funny.
It is. They have two teams and they don't support any of them. But it's an LA thing. It's an LA thing. Like,
very large.
I don't feel that.
But you didn't know me before.
Yeah.
No,
You
watched
3 years ago.
Yeah, I've been on.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, my kids, I told them that they are Bears fans forever. They have no choice. And
always
as long as,
I wonder what's going on.
really, I adopted the Mariners when I came here, because because I don't like my daughters with the people. And so I wanted to at least root for the basketball team. And, but I was all in for the Cubs in the, you know,
Right.
when the series. Actually, I went to the game one of the NLCS in Chicago.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
I usually go back for like one football game a year, and it just so happened that game was there that weekend to that game.
Yeah.
Turns out the NLCS game was there.
I think 68.
Holy cow.
And so,
So it makes
so, but I wouldn't call myself a coach.
yeah, so it makes it feel pretty
But,
comfortable.
But yeah, my kids love
I do 3 milligrams.
So my son.
One day.
Although they're
I have to get done too.
Well, but see, my son.
Yeah, they better watch out.
For some
Yeah.
reason, he likes it, so he would go on Fridays when the Seahawks were doing really well. They would do a spirit day at school, and they would raise the 12 flag in front of the school, and my son would wear a Bears helmet, a Brian Urlacher jersey,
Yeah.
and a Bears flag as a cape. And he would just love the fact that everyone in the principal even would
Yeah.
totally make fun of him, and he loves it, you know. Both of my, well, neither of my kids were actually born yet, but they moved here with me. But they love the fact they hate the Seahawks. And I don't hate the Seahawks. I root for them. I root for them when it doesn't affect the Bears.
Yeah, very loud. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it is kind of
You go to any restaurant and you realize, oh, shoot, it's a Gary night. Yeah. You can't even hear the conversation. Yeah.
Or you can just go.
Like, probably that.
No, I'm glad you did, because I normally.
Because I saw a
Fellow
Bears
are not few and far between.
Yeah, they are. That's true. There are not many of them.
People in general are very few and far
That's very true. It's very true. But I'll tell you, being in my class in the fall is a totally different experience. It's all I talk about.
My mom
So,
actually.
my fall students, yeah, Cody Parkey. Even my daughter, you know, she's like, oh,
She lives in Guam.
imagine being Cody
So
Parkey.
she's
Poor guy.
too far
You don't
away.
hate them, but that's not bad.
Well, he got tipped.
Yeah, I know.
The ball got
That's
tipped.
why.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, thank you.
All right, good having you in class. Yeah, we'll see you next time.
No, she's actually a really good friend. Okay, yeah.
How's it going?
She wants to donate first thing.
I'm thinking that you're gonna share some stories that are gonna be interesting.
I can't imagine that would not be the case. Well, let me just say, I know for sure I'll share stories. Now, whether they're interesting to you or not is kind of is a separate question. But I don't have the ability to not tell stories. Unfortunately. Sometimes, I think. Sometimes. Thank you. But, no, I mean, I think one of the reasons why I keep my practice, and I don't really need it anymore.
Yeah.
You don't have insurance. Because I try to stay in the game.
I do have
And I think
insurance, but
that's kind of an
I would
important,
probably have to have
I think it's
one.
important for me for what I teach to not become disassociated from, completely disassociated from the actual practice. You know? I think it's
You still
important.
negotiate with my department?
No, I don't do tax cases anymore.
Oh,
Well, I shouldn't say that. I would do them if they came in, but, they've been fewer and far between once the economy got better. You know, at the next correction, I'll probably get a flood of calls.
oh.
Your brain would get worse.
Yeah, I got,
People just pay their tax cases now?
well, yeah, I mean, you have, you know,
Wait.
so you
about
mentioned
twice in 8
contractors,
years.
right?
Yeah.
Contractors, you know, I'm sure you're aware of this, but
That
most
is my entire
contractors
whole.
are
I know,
one job away from
Yeah.
insolvency.
Uh-huh.
Because they, for the most part,
Feel it.
they're,
Yeah, I'm
they
waiting for
fund
that.
today's payroll.
Yeah, I'm waiting for that. And
So they go
I
sign
already
your
had
next job,
one
get the
transfer
deposit.
that I
That's
had
the
to
money
take
they use to
the
pay their
entire
workers
injection
today. So
forever.
they're
That-
usually
I'm
paying
already
workers
on
with money from the next job. So if the next job,
I don't want
when the economy tanks, contractors go belly up in droves because
Oh.
they then can't get the next deal. They can't pay their
3 times and
employees
have
till
it
they
checked.
stop paying their taxes.
Well, they
And then-
already spent the sales tax money they collected from last customer.
Yeah, right.
Let's
If
take a
they,
picture
if they
of
collect
you
it.
and
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
post on
yeah,
Facebook.
Right.
Here.
and, so.
I already know, that,
usually,
to me, that
contractors
word too
don't
fancy.
have money coming in, you know, more money than they don't
Really
spend
hot
too
to
fast.
smell.
You know,
And then
so when
every
the music
time it goes
stops,
to doctor
they
appointment.
and the last
Do you
downturn,
think it's-
I
What
probably
is
had
that?
Michael family.
2 dozen contractors
Michael
who
Family?
either IRS or DOR problems or both.
Yeah, so that's sales act.
Oh, easier to.
And I'll say this to my
I'm
class,
everything
I
today.
love this,
Yeah.
but what I say is,
What do you think?
I would
I
much rather have an
Two?
IRS case than a DOR
I'm
case.
so jealous. I'm on 6 a
The
day.
IRS, there it is.
That's my
One
experience too, from
One
from
on
talking
in the
to
morning, one at night, and
Yeah.
like, we are just marked the uncollectible.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, that's not gonna happen with us.
Well, the other thing I get a lot is I'll get, someone will come
How
in,
come
they'll
your
get the
sisters don't have to?
assessment. It's
pay for
basically
me?
twice the tax by the time,
It's an autoimmune disease, so some.
And they say, can't we just call them up and do an offer of compromise, like I did with federal tax? Not really. I mean, I've a couple of times, I've managed to get some relief, but almost always through the appeals process. I mean, almost never directly. Well, one time we did it through compliance, but that was because they knew they had a shitty case. They knew that the collections case was, that the underlying case was weak. And so
So it was a litigation.
yeah, exactly, yeah, but that's pretty rare. For the most part, taxpayers think that the DOR is being unfair, but for the most part, my experience has been that they really only pursue cases that really actually are legitimate,
Hate losing, so.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and then, then when you guys did the amnesty in
11, I think?
11 or 12, and I remember telling clients at the time, this is a one-time deal, man. Don't assume this is gonna happen. And of course it did. It was just because the state was so desperate for cash at the time.
Yeah, I think we ended up losing on that one.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, they did this big thing about how much money we brought in for the thing. I'm like, yeah, but look at our receivable.
Yeah, right.
We could have collected that.
Yeah.
If you had left it with us.
Yeah, yeah.
And then there were companies,
They panicked.
there were big companies that they called up their auditor and said, I want you to finish this audit.
Yeah.
And then they put in for amnesty, and then they waited the 3 months and collected interest on all that money.
Yeah.
And then they paid us in full millions of dollars, some of these people. But they just used it to game the system to make more money.
Yeah. Very true.
Uh,
Very true. We'll be talking much more about this.
Yeah. This will be good.
You need me? Okay. Let me just, I have no idea if this worked. I know. That didn't work. Darn it. Okay. All right.
You can do one of those super cool office videos that
I'm gonna have to do that.
Fabio always did.
I know.
He's going through
Oh wait,
divorce.
end stream.